Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show and happy Monday. I hope you and your family had a great Thanksgiving. We did. It was like the real Thanksgiving, but it felt like the fake Thanksgiving because we already had our Fakesgiving with our extended family. And so it was super easy. We actually went out to this lovely restaurant and somebody else cooked, which, you know, for my family, that's a gift to us all. Caught a little bit of a cold, but I'm on the mend. And now we are back with a packed show. I'm so excited. It's December. For those of you who are listening, we have in the red studio now our Christmas trees, our white, they're green Christmas trees with fake snow all over them and little white blinky lights. It makes me so happy. We have our Christmas decorations up already. I wonder if you do too. Doesn't it just improve your mood? Here in Connecticut tomorrow, we're supposed to get some snow. Oh, I miss snow. At heart, I'm just a Syracuse girl. That's where I lived the first 10 years of my life. I miss snow and sledding. I love Christmas. I know you do too. So let's take a moment on this December 1st. You only get some 80 to 90 to 100 of them if you're lucky in your life. And enjoy the most wonderful time of the year. And no, it is not too early to play the Christmas carols. Even my boys had to admit I'm allowed to play them now. Okay, just before we went to break, a group of Democrats dubbed the Seditious Six by the Trump administration released a video urging military members to disobey orders they think are illegal. It came out of nowhere. No one, even the left-wing press, started, asking questions about this. No one knew what the hell are the orders that they're talking about, and they didn't know. These lawmakers got embarrassed repeatedly, thinking that the media would just go along with this. Like, of course, it's Trump, so he's issued illegal orders. They didn't. And it got to the point where even Caroline Leavitt complimented the mainstream media for asking questions of these Democrat lawmakers who then looked like morons, unable to name the alleged illegal order. So that's basically how it went down. And then, of course, since their friends had been embarrassed, meaning the Democrats, the media went to work trying to find some new reporting that actually would suggest there had been an illegal order. And lo and behold, they came up with it. I mean, it's just like, I'm sorry, but we would be remiss if we didn't point out. Can you imagine the Washington Post doing this in order to actually run cover for a Republican administration as opposed to expose one? Can you imagine if they had done something like this next level reporting to get to the bottom of how many orders have been issued and where and how, and which one may have crossed a line when Joe Biden was the president? It's just so on the nose. We'll get into what they've come up with. Plus, the spin continues after the tragic shooting in D.C. of 2 National Guard members by an Afghani national last week. Joining me now to discuss it all, Mark Halperin. He is the host of Next Up with Mark Halperin on the MK Media Podcast Network. Go and subscribe right now. It's a great, great show. I love listening to Mark's opening talking points. He keeps me centered and up to date on the latest inside the Beltway. So go ahead and subscribe right now wherever you get your audio podcasts and on YouTube at Next Up Halperin, HALPERIN.com.
Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X.
Believe it or not, Christmas is sneaking up fast. Can you believe it? And let's be honest, between shopping, travel, and endless to-do lists, it can be chaos every year. But we don't have to just survive it. We can reclaim the peace and purpose Christmas was meant to bring. Somewhere along the way, Advent became a marathon of gifts, dinners, and decorations. But what's the point if we're left exhausted and distracted? Let me tell you about Hallow. Their Advent prayer challenge, Pray 25, Be Still, features reflections from Chris Pratt, Gwen Stefani, and more. It's a call to pause, breathe, and remember the real story of Christmas. A young woman's life upended, a man protecting his family, and a corrupt ruler trying to destroy it all. And yet, they found peace. This is not about a Hallmark moment. It's about finding stillness and divine peace in a broken world. Try Hallow free for 3 months at hallow.com/Megyn. Mark, welcome back.
Good to be here, and I broke the rules and started listening to the Christmas music on Tuesday, so sue me.
Yes. Now, let me ask you a question about that. Do you listen to only Christmas music, like when you're in your car, or do you go back and forth, for the next 3 weeks?
No, when I'm in the car, it's the Sirius XM holiday channels, and yes. I like Sinatra, the Carpenters. I like pretty much any artist I've ever liked. I just love spinning up the Christmas stuff. And then, you know, if I'm being let down, I just switch to the phone and program myself.
Yes, same. I love SiriusXM has made channel 4 now,
Yep.
the Holly channel. They've got the 15 is now the Fallon Christmas. That's a new one. Those are good ones that I haven't always heard. And then I love traditional Christmas, which I think is 71.
Yep.
Sinatra's 70, which also is a good channel, by the way.
Great channel. Those are the 3 I listened to. We were just away for Thanksgiving, and so I had the car, and I just locked in on those 3. I saved all 3 channels, and they're spectacular.
Yes, it's like it gets you right in the mood. And soon we'll be busting out the Christmas specials. Do you unleash those in a certain way? I'm curious.
I'm a linear TV guy when it comes to Christmas specials. I like to watch them as they're offered up by the majors. So.
Oh, old school. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a favorite?
I love Rudolph, and I love the Charlie Brown one. Those are my 2 favorites.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I love Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And the Burgermeister, Meister Burger. That's a great one. Except we fast forward through the scene where Jessica sings. It's a bad one.
I agree. It's a little warbly. I love claymation, and I tried to explain to my son, like, when I was a kid, claymation was the equivalent of like 4D graphics. But there's something about the claymation. I just find like any claymation that's got Santa whiskers, I just love.
Yes, it's good stuff. And I'll give you one more before we move on to the news, which is I grew up watching this. I'm going to be honest, it's not well made. You see that when you're an adult in a way that you don't when you're a kid. But I still love it. And it's called The Christmas That Almost Wasn't. It's so good. You can find it on... At one point, you couldn't find it anywhere before we had apps all over our TVs. And I had to order it from some remote website in Italy. I don't know. I got it. Anyway, it's so cute. It's about this guy named Mr. Prune who lives to ruin Christmas. And he's harassing Santa and Mrs. Claus at the North Pole. And Santa has to go get a job down in like Everyman Town. He takes one at a toy store. Mr. Prune won't let up. He's a major antagonist, this guy. It's just such a fun one. And of course, for me, brings back
I don't know that one, but I like the Dickensian name of Mr. Prune. We just watched, I'd never seen it, The Dog Who Saved Christmas. You ever seen that?
No.
It's hokey, but it's really good.
Recommend. Okay. Thank you for that, sir. And I do need to mention one other thing. I mention it every year, but my favorite Christmas special of all time is Christmas in Connecticut, which is from 1947. Barbara Stanwyck. Hello, black and white. They have a sleigh that they ride. That's me hitting the horses with the straps. Through the Connecticut countryside, the snow. It's a very weird and inappropriate love story that somehow you root for anyway. And just the whole setting of it makes me feel like it's Christmas.
I love that. I'll tell you, I know we said we both keep saying one more, but I have to do one more, which is the Bing Crosby, David Bowie, Little Drummer Boy. Do you know that?
Yes.
That's magical.
That's a great
magical
one.
I watched that 10
truly
times,
is one of the
10 times
greatest of all time.
It's incredible.
Now that is an appropriate use of the term magical. This morning on AM Update, which you sometimes host on, we talked about the Cory Booker engagement, and Cory Booker used the term magical to describe, I think, their date or their second date. Then when he proposed, he had Mariah Carey playing Mark. He took her out on their first date to Broadway to see a female empowerment play, Suffragette, the Suffs. I've got questions, Mark Halperin. What's happening with Cory Booker?
Well, first of all, they gave the exclusive pictures and TikTok and backstory to the New York Times, but it read like People magazine. It was just like this classic. There we're seeing, those of you watching on YouTube, you can see. And the whole thing that you just outlined, and you hit most of the highlights, I felt was written by ChatGPT. Like composed the TikTok of Cory Booker's whirlwind romance with this young lady.
Yes.
Now they made her Jewish in the real version, which was a bit of a surprise. Yeah. I don't know.
Did not know that.
They had like a split wedding. They got married at City Hall, and then they had like a show wedding that was half Jewish and half whatever it is he is. I mean,
half Jewish, half gay.
Yeah. There you go. I mean,
that's what everybody's thinking.
I mean, everyone I know who knows him is surprised, but not surprised. And he has gone to New Hampshire in the last couple of months, and he is kind of an under-discussed person of ambition. You remember James Carville's famous line about running for president when somebody says, well, that person ran, or they really before they really run again. And James said, running for president's like having sex. You don't just do it once and then say, I did it. I'm done. Don't need to do it again. So
didn't hear it. I've never heard that. That's very
now, in this case, as you said, some people are raising the question of what kind of sex are we actually talking about? But
because I heard on his way to New Hampshire, he swung by Chelsea in Manhattan and also Provincetown, Massachusetts. It's just it's unconfirmed report, allegedly.
Good places to raise money. Look, people have talked about his personal life forever, and you don't need to have the world's most sensitive gaydar to have a point of view here, but he's now like Tim Scott. He's legally wed, and I wish the young couple all happiness.
Me too. However short-lived it may be. It may take him right through to 2028 and the primary season and not beyond, but I hope I'm wrong, and I'm just a cynical mofo, and I've misread the entire situation. Though I do view Mariah Carey as a blaring red siren warning sign for any woman dating a man. No man should select that.
Wasn't Cher or Mariah Carey? I mean, Cher or Liza Minnelli. So. Yeah,
true. Equally damning. You raise a good point. It's the trifecta. In any event, good luck to them. They're going to need it. Okay, back here, we've got the Democrats have stumbled upon their alleged illegal order, and they're thrilled. They're so excited. What they're saying is that on one of those Venezuelan drug boat strikes, we struck the boat, that there were 2 survivors, drug dealers, driving the boat or on the boat, who were then clinging to the remnants of the boat. And that on Pete Hegseth's order, they then dropped a second bomb to take out the 2 survivors, and then 2 more bombs to sink the boat, because I guess we want no remnants of the boat whatsoever. And Trump was asked about this on Air Force One, and Trump denied that Pete had done it. He actually said, Pete told me that he hasn't done it, that he did not agree to that. And now we've had 2 inquiries opened in Republican-controlled bodies of Congress, the House and the Senate. So the Republicans, or at least making a show of seeming interested in whether this happened, because many military experts have said they don't see how this could be legal. Like that you're not allowed, they say, and this is still under investigation about what happened, but if what I just said is true, and that's an if, that it would be clearly illegal because you're not allowed to kill people who survive an initial strike and who are, even if they're enemy combatants, kind of hanging on, or in this case, possibly literally hanging on for dear life. Your thoughts on it?
Well, I contain multitudes on this. First of all, I'm a big fan of stopping the invasion of drugs into the United States. And I think our children and our grandchildren are going to be so confused when they read in the history books that we had presidents who did nothing about it and just sat back and let people send drugs into the country that killed people and hurt productivity and just all the scourge of things that drugs do. So I'm a big fan of anything that addresses that, number one. Number two, I think President Trump has proven that if you use force aggressively and you use it in a way that minimizes or doesn't cause any loss of American life, that it can be a great deterrent. We saw that, at least potentially with Iran. We've seen it in other cases, and we're seeing it here. So people who say, well, they're not interdicting all the drugs, they're just getting a few boats. No, they're sending a message to people whose families and individuals are going to be more reluctant to go to the high seas with drugs destined for the United States or elsewhere. So I don't want to be misunderstood. I think those two things are good. But I'm also old-fashioned about two things, and I think they're really fundamental to what America's about. Number one, I don't think the President of the United States should kill people indiscriminately, or our forces should kill people indiscriminately in violation of law and American tradition. And that may be what's happened here in this particular case, but it's clearly the case in general. And I think there's been insufficient debate about it and insufficient scrutiny about it. And number two, super old-fashioned and kind of diluted. I think Congress is a co-equal branch, and in some cases a superior branch when it comes to the declaration of war. And I think no American, whatever you call your politics, no American should be complacent about presidents. All the post-World Cold War presidents have done this, using their power and disregarding Congress's role in declaring war. And I think that's what's happened here too. And I think that's, at a minimum, should be examined.
Well, that touches on an interesting dynamic that's popping up more and more in the press about whether there's some group of Republicans that are dejected and demoralized on Capitol Hill right now, Mark, because they feel like a rubber stamp to Trump. They feel like they can't challenge him or they're going to get primaried and chased out of Congress, MTG style. And so they do feel like they've ceded their constitutional authority because they're also afraid of the 800-pound gorilla. Now, is that an actual thing right now, or is that just a leftist media fever dream?
No, it's an actual thing. It's not based on, talking to Democrats or talking to Don Bacon or Tom Massey. They're Trump loyalists who are unhappy. Now, some of them are unhappy because of principle. And you don't see, as we did over the weekend, normally in the Trump era, you don't see the Republican chairs of the applicable committees in the House and Senate saying this needs to be investigated and saying it in a bipartisan way with the Democratic ranking members. And they're doing that because they are troubled by this on principle. Most of the unhappiness amongst Republicans, again, not a Democratic or media creation, is concern about the midterms. Concerned that they're going to lose the House majority because of the economy and a feeling that the White House is insufficiently moving to address what voters are concerned about, particularly how much things cost. So those are two different areas of unhappiness, one principle, one pure politics. And again, I think the political one is probably, if you could quantify unhappiness, probably a greater source right now amongst Republicans.
Right, because, well, we were talking about this a little on the tour, that it's in a way, it's so much more fun to be in the opposition, and just like lay criticisms on the people in power. But then when your team is in power and there's infighting and there's all sorts of articles every day about how terrible they are. I know it's from mostly the mainstream, which hates Trump and hates everybody in the Trump administration. But it's aggravating and it's irritating. And it can be kind of a downer. And I feel like the Republican Party is going through that right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of three main areas, right? One is about dealing with the economy, this word that the president doesn't much like, affordability. But these are tough problems. The cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of energy. These are tough issues for any president to deal with. So that's one source of anxiety and infighting. Two is there's some cabinet members like Pete Hegseth, like Kash Patel, head of the FBI, and like Kristi Noem, who have now had to face multiple stories that are super negative about their stewardships that, again, are not from the deep state. They're not from Democrats. They're some cases published in the legacy media, but not always. So today, for instance, New York Post has a story about Kash Patel by Miranda Devine.
I saw it. We should talk about it. It's devastating
piece. And again, you got to consider the source. Miranda's a great reporter and writer and columnist. She's not writing a negative story based on the deep state sources. She's just not.
That's what concerns me. She's so good.
So that's number two is you've got some cabinet members. And then the president's poll numbers just aren't good. And again, that's not the liberal media. It's not fake polls. Every poll, including private Republican polls, show it's a snapshot of where we are. It doesn't mean they'll be bad next year. It doesn't mean he can't turn things around. But his poll numbers are really bad right now. And that just always causes tension.
The one that just hit is from Gallup, which is, the mother of all polls. Yeah. Forgive me, I'm having a cough drop. But that has approval rating down to 36, a new second term low. Keep going.
Yeah, and amongst independents, I think in that poll it's 25. And again, this is not liberal. It's not anti-Trump. If his numbers are that bad at the midterms, they'll lose the House. They might lose the Senate. So that just causes anxiety. And this White House has done a very good job of not just making Republicans in Congress afraid of them, although they're good at that, but making them feel they're being communicated with. And right now, they're claiming they don't feel that way. The White House takes issue with that and says they're communicating all the time, and it's just an excuse to rail against the White House. But this is not a great time right now for the president's political team. But there's an interval here to improve things. But at the moment, there are these sources of tension, and when you see somebody like Miranda Devine write a piece like that about Kash Patel, who's the ultra MAGA loyalist, it just makes everybody think, like a horror movie, like the villain or the enemy or whatever you want to describe it. They're in the house. They're not outside the house. They're in the house.
Well, the FBI report she references confused me.
Me too.
Because this is what her headline is, opinion, damning report labels FBI rudderless ship under Kash Patel, with him and Dan Bongino more concerned with building personal resumes, which is a quote. And then she bases her report on, it's called a 115 report, quote, source reporting and analysis of the FBI under the leadership of FBI Director Kash Patel, a pulse check for the first 6 months. 4, U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary and Chairman Chuck Grassley, and U.S. House Committee on the Judiciary and Chairman Jim Jordan, by the National Alliance of Retired and Active Duty FBI Special Agents and Analysts. So I remain unclear on whether this was requested by the Senate Committee, whether this is just a bunch of ex-FBI people who are disgruntled and predictably don't like Dan and Kash, or what this is. Sounds so official. I don't understand whether it is, but what we do know is it's very nasty. It really goes after Kash. They have a passing shot at Dan Bongino, trying to diminish him, but mostly it's focused on Kash Patel. And the thing that they're really zeroing in on is what they say is like a vanity, I guess, of his. A vanity. That they talk about how when he flew out to the Charlie Kirk staging, like the FBI staging in the wake of it, he was insistent on getting an FBI jacket brought to him on board the plane before he disembarked, and that he apparently did not have his own, quoting here, FBI raid jacket with him. He refused to step from the plane without wearing one. That FBI special agents at the Salt Lake City field office busy working on the Kirk case, quote, had to stop and ask around to find an FBI raid jacket, a medium-sized one that would fit. When a jacket belonging to a female agent was delivered to Patel on the plane, he complained that, quote, 2 areas on the upper sleeves did not have Velcro patches attached. And then he would not leave the plane, quote, until he had 2 patches to cover those areas, quote, so members of an FBI SWAT team took patches off of their uniforms and ran those patches over to Patel at the airport. The patches were then attached to the loaner FBI raid jacket, and Patel disembarked from the plane. The director was not happy with the way the investigation was going. He had an expletive-filled tirade, whatever. All that's kind of ridiculous. Of course, people yell in these tense times. But the jacket story, if true, it's not great.
No. Look, I had the same reaction you did, too. Like, I'm reading this story. I've read my share of stories about stuff like this. I don't remember this kind of quasi-official, anonymous report that's handed over like that. I just don't remember anything quite like that. Not just with the FBI. I don't remember anything like that. They wrote like a serious, rigorous report with all these details, but it's not official, but it's kind of official. And then again, the question of Miranda. She's the only one, as far as I know, who's reported this so far. She's not anti-Trump. She doesn't write for an anti-Trump publication. And yet, with a few, to be sure, paragraphs of positive things, it's a very negative story. It's a very negative report. So you got to ask yourself, how did this thing get done? And how did it end up with Miranda? And how did Miranda decide to write it up? These are not the only stories like this about Kash Patel. There's other stories, but most of them have circulated in places like the Washington Post, the New York Times. So it's a bit of a mystery. But you're seeing the same things with Pete Hegseth, and to some extent with Kristi Noem, which is again, it's not liberal media. It's people who love the president, who care about the president, who are using different outlets, in this case the New York Post, to put out there's problems. It's hard to escape the conclusion that the people are motivated by a desire to get the president to make a change in personnel, and he's not done that yet, and it's not clear if these will have an impact.
You know what though, it's always. Today we had a decision from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals before we came on the air, saying that Alina Habak cannot be the acting U.S. attorney for the district a district in New Jersey. And this is separate from the Tish James and James Comey challenge, which is still making its way up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we'll see whether that court affirms the lower court decision that she, too, was, that the prosecutor there was also not appointed correctly. That's Lindsay Halligan. So this is a separate thing. It's Alina Habba. She was Trump's personal lawyer, and he made her acting U.S. attorney within this district in the Northeast that answers to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Third Circuit Court of Appeals came down unanimously, 3-judge panel, saying they don't have the power to appoint her. She's got to go. She was not properly appointed. She's not the proper U.S. attorney. This is not a great decision for Trump. It's not a great decision to the extent it gets considered by the Fourth Circuit. That's deciding something similar, though not identical, with Lindsay Halligan. But the first thing I did when I got it, Mark, was to look at who are the judges, who was appointed, who were they appointed by. And in today's day and age, what you need to see is not just a Republican president. You need to see Trump, that it was a Trump appointee, if Trump has any fighting chance. If you see George W. Bush appointee, George H.W. Bush appointee, Reagan, you're not going to see it. You might as well see it be a Barack Obama judge. It's almost that bad. They all hate Trump. And that court was 2 W appointees and an Obama appointee. So not surprisingly, we knew how it was going to go. And that's exactly how it went. And that's kind of what I think when I see a lot of the Republicans leaking on Trump. Because clearly this came from somebody who's more, I think, right-wing aligned. They went to Miranda. I could be wrong, but it's not just Miranda. I see some of these reporting in other right-wing papers. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the Bush-era people who, just because they're part of the Trump administration in some way, shape, or form, like they're currently at the FBI, does not mean that they're pro-Trump. And if you were there, even if you're a Republican, but you're a more George W. Bush Republican, you might go to the Post or the Wall Street Journal in particular and leak something very damaging to Trump, so it will look like it's, right-on-right violence. It'll look more credible to the right wing, that is. But you really hate him just as much as the left hates him. And what you almost never see is Democrats doing this to Democrats. I'm like, you're telling me there weren't terrible stories to leak about Pete Buttigieg? Bull, or Merrick Garland for that matter, or Chris Wray even. There were. It just doesn't happen.
Well, it does happen with Kamala Harris. So there's at least one exception there. There were stories like that about her and her staff. I think that it's a sad thing, but it's true. Judges are result oriented, and I used to say it all the time after Bush v. Gore, and lawyers and various political lawyers would call me and say, no, judges are fair, justices are fair, they follow the law. No, they're almost all result oriented, and I think that's just horrible. They should be ruling based on the law, and, no matter who nominated them for the court. In this case, you're absolutely right that it's a cheat for a reporter to say Republicans are saying if they're Bush Republicans, because the Bushes and the Bush, Team Bush are not fans of Donald Trump, anymore, as you said, than the Team Obama is. But I'll say again, there are Republicans now who are unhappy with Kash Patel, who are Trump Republicans. There are Trump Republicans who are unhappy with Donald Trump right now. Some about the economy, some about Epstein. So you see that reflected not just at the elite level, which is I'm talking about, but you see that in the Gallup poll, but also in other even Republican polls. Republicans, for various reasons, are unhappy, even Trump Republicans, with the president right now. And his first order of business is to turn that around, not just overall, but on issues. Republicans need to be confident about the economy and his policies. They need to be confident about Epstein and his view there, et cetera. So he no doubt has problems with Bush Republicans and Reagan Republicans, but he's got some problems with Trump Republicans too now. And I know that because I talked to them directly.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a year to go before the midterms, so it's reversible, but it requires some honesty right now about what exactly are the problems and are they fixable, like the economy, like a better message and actual better policy on healthcare, like not running around saying we need all these Chinese immigrants here and in our universities, and that we need H-1B visas to abound because our workers can't do it, like that interview with Laura Ingraham. That's the kind of stuff that etches away at the base. They do not want to hear that stuff at all, even though the more Chamber of Commerce Republicans do like it, and that's why he says it. Okay, let's keep going, though, on this story about the alleged illegal strike. The left is now very, very concerned about a president or his Department of War head ordering an illegal death, an illegal killing of someone deemed an enemy combatant. Except they didn't much seem to mind during the Obama era. I was on all the time talking about these strikes that Obama was doing with the drones. I remember O'Reilly and I having many, many debates about this. And hold on, we've got some with Obama bragging about how good he was at killing people. And, oh, he told you that in your book, too.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Where is that soundbite, Debbie? I know that one's not on tape, but the Obama drone strike is. This is where he was, Shot 7 is where he was joking about how good he was with the Predator drones at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's a joke, but it's based on reality because he really was taking out not just alleged terrorists, but Americans who had no due process with his drones. Here's the joke, and then we'll get to the bigger news you made with him in your book.
The Jonas brothers are here. They're out there somewhere. Sasha and Malia are huge fans, but boys don't get any ideas. I have 2 words for you: Predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Okay, so they're perfectly willing to yuck it up. I didn't see like a 6th senator video saying, oh, disobey illegal orders in case you get one to take out the Jonas brothers. But with you, Mark, he took that joke and made a very serious comment that showed his real feelings about his use of those drones. And what did he say?
Well, he didn't say it directly to me. He said we reported that he said it to his aides. He said, I guess I'm pretty good at killing people. I think that's the quote in Double Down, the sequel to Game Change. And as you said, he killed an American, at least one American. That's a big difference, right? For the President of the United States, do we owe the same level of due process to people who aren't Americans, who the president says we're at? I don't think so. But for an American to get no due process and have his president kill him, that's quite something. Now, again, might have been justified by some moral, situational ethics thing. But as you said, where was the outrage then by the press? I was outraged. I was talking quite a bit about it. But where was the outrage from the media and from Democrats and Republicans who are principled? Like, again, there might be a justification for it, but in this country with our traditions, this should be discussed and debated, and the president should have to justify it rather than just saying, I control the weapons, and now with the drones, even easier. I control these things, and so I'm going to kill whoever I think should be killed. That's just not our tradition. There might be justification for it, and I'm not saying I don't share the goals, but it should be debated and discussed and scrutinized, and there should be disclosure about it. And I would say nothing could be more MAGA than saying we can't have a president who's unfettered in their ability to use our military to do whatever he wants. That's just not the way America is.
Mm-hmm. He said to you, or they quoted in your book, Double Down, 2012, turns out I'm really good at killing people. Yeah. Didn't know that was going to be a strong suit of mine. Yeah. I mean, wow. It was a 16-year-old. He was an American citizen, killed by a U.S. drone strike in Yemen. He was the son of terrorist Anwar al-Awlaki, and the justification was, wrong place, wrong time. Yeah. Like, too bad. Sorry, not sorry. And look, the problem they have in the Hegseth situation is reportedly, and again, this is a big asterisk because this is Washington Post reporting, that allegedly after this incident on September 2nd, they then changed the policy, the approach to not, quote, double tap if there were survivors on the boats, from the boats now swimming in the water after their boat was blown to smithereens. Yeah. So it would suggest an acknowledgement that having taken out those two on September 2nd was not ideal. I don't know if it's an acknowledgement it was illegal, but it certainly seems to have been a change in policy. And in the law, that's exactly the kind of thing you use against somebody, the change in policy or the change in behavior. Having said all that, Mark, these guys are in no danger whatsoever. If some overzealous, Senate panel leads to a recommendation for charges, the DOJ somehow finds, I don't know, some weird independent streak and decides to indict these guys, or whoever it would be, it might be a military prosecution, President Trump is going to pardon them. These guys have nothing to worry about for this strike.
Well, they don't have anything to worry about, I agree with you, from the point of view of a Justice Department indictment. And I may be wrong about this, but I don't know that the president can pardon people in the court of military justice. And certainly it could impact their careers.
I think he can.
Really? I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example of that.
So I don't know. I'm trying to rember. I was reading, among others, Andy McCarthy this morning. He was very tough on the president here, very tough on Hegseth, and not at all on his side. But I think he did acknowledge up front that a pardon would be likely and could render it moot.
If you read the Washington Post story carefully, as you did, people should know the Washington Post story leaves room for the notion that the order to kill the last two gentlemen, allegedly, was not a direct order from Hegseth. That Hegseth's order was make sure, everybody gets killed. But it's possible, if you read the Post story literally, that it was the commander who said, do the second tap, rather than Hegseth himself.
Well, I guess that won't necessarily affect anything other than the truth of Hegseth's denial, as espoused by Trump on Air Force One, that Hegseth told me he did not order that. Right. So, that may get Hegseth off the hook. In any event, it's like, to me, it's kind of annoying to even debate it. I do think our soldiers and, all armed forces should not commit war crimes. Mm-hmm. Definitely on the team, don't commit a war crime. But I also feel like I object to even the scrutiny of this event, because it's all manufactured. It's only being done to retroactively justify this, seditious six and that's what Hegseth is calling them, and their video, which was based on nothing. They're just now digging. It's a fishing expedition. And it does feel a little, Stalin's right-hand man-esque, like, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. That's how it feels to me. So I'm really not that into it, nor do I really care that we're killing the drug boat guys trying to kill my kids and yours right now by bringing their fentanyl to the United States to try to get our kids when they go to college with, some drug in some moment of weakness where they think they're taking a Xanax, like what happened to poor Eric Bolling's child, and instead it's laced with fentanyl. So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected, a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American people.
Yeah, like I said, I share the premise that you just raised, because I think it's important that we do something to keep our porous border from being flooded with drugs that are killing our people. So if this is in service of that, I think it's something that should be considered. I just think there needs to be more debate, because I just don't think it's good for the United States to be violating international law, if that's what happened here, or taking human life under conditions that aren't vetted. Now, I would say every one of these actions has a legal team. And my hope would be that the legal team is signing off on this stuff. So while outside...
That's what Hegseth is saying.
So while outside lawyers may say this is a clear violation, let's find out. Again, declassification without revealing sources and methods and operational details. Let's find out what the legal justification was for it. Because if it can't be justified legally, then it's hard to defend it, even if the mission and the goals are admirable and necessary. But presumably these were signed off on by lawyers. So let's see what they said. Let's see how they justified it. That hasn't been forthcoming. And I do think that would quiet the complaints of at least some who are fair-minded about this.
Yes, and Hegseth says they did have sign-off from lawyers at the top of the DOJ and the military system on these strikes, though his memo's a little ambiguous on, what about the question of the two swimming in the water? In any event, I'm not going to lie, I'm glad they're dead. Let's keep going, because There's a new ad out today. This whole thing got started as a result of this so-called seditious six. Again, that's a Hegseth term for these lawmakers. Now, today, there's a new ad that's just been put out by the Women's March, which is such a weird thing to still have around as like an organization dropping ads. And this one is trying to do the same thing. And the way those six tried to get between the commander-in-chief and his armed military, this one seems to try to get between the commander-in-chief and his armed ICE officers. Here it is. Watch this.
You will be caught. You will be removed. And you will never return.
Christy Nolan on TV. Someone comes in with handcuffs. A man. He looks forlorn.
Hey, Daddy, how's your day?
He's an ICE officer. What will you say, read the captions, when she asks about your day? Now, these dramatic scenes of ICE taken out of context.
A mask can't hide you from your neighbors, your children, and God. They'll know. You can walk away before the shame follows you home.
Daddy, how's your day?
You can walk away. You can walk away as an ICE officer while not and still receive your paycheck, because these are just cops who are charged with making arrests, Mark, based on warrants that are given to them through a duly enacted process. That's not what the left will tell you. They think it's all like dragging kids out of their homes and making little girls cry. That's what the Women's March wants you to believe. But they also thought that, equal rights meant wearing a pink P-word hat and standing on the Upper West Side doing absolutely nothing. That's the same group.
Yeah. The tens of millions of people who voted for President Trump left no ambiguity about the mandate he had on these issues. And they may not like every way ICE operates, but the macro mission to do what is necessary to not just control the border and not just remove certain people from the United States, but to send the message that you cannot come to this country illegally and expect to be treated like a citizen. That's what's happening. Now, are things happening that are in error or in excess or that aren't to the liking of a Democratic mayor or governor? They are. And that's being fought out on the streets of the United States. And, the hard cases are when some American citizen gets caught up or some grandma who's been sewing clothes in a community for 30 years gets caught up. But if people are here illegally, then the law says they need to go. And in some cases, they're being told to go. If a citizen is caught up, the government should do its best to make amends and to figure out how to keep that from happening. But this isn't some rogue operation that's disconnected from democracy. This is what people who voted for the president, in the main, one of the main things that they wanted to see him do, and that's what's happening.
Circling back, you can be pardoned by the president under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It happened under Biden via the U.S. Probation Office. The president can pardon somebody under for federal offenses, including those obtained in U.S. district courts, the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, and military courts martial. Yeah,
right.
That's what I
All
thought.
right, I stand corrected.
Yeah, no worries. They can be pardoned by Trump, and they will be. So they're not really facing any actual legal jeopardy, at least not under this administration. And given what we saw at the end of Biden, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw just a blanket from Trump on his way out that he pardons all the military officers for any crimes, any alleged crimes in connection with the Venezuelan drug boat raids, so that they don't have to worry, and they shouldn't have to worry. This should not be a distraction for them. They already have to put their lives on the line every day, their actual safety. They shouldn't have to worry about this BS too. All right, forging forward. Let's talk about what's happening in Minnesota, because we spent the first 42 minutes talking about some not great things for Republicans with which they are going to have to deal. But they do have something happening on Team Blue that is an outrage, and that gets right to the heart, I think, of why most Republicans cannot stand Democrat rule. This excessive government purse that is filled with other people's money, none of which anyone can afford, that is then doled out to favored interest groups. And then even when fraud is detected, the purse is not closed. Instead, it's refilled with more of your money and mine to fund, in this case, Somali immigrants who are buying luxury cars, fancy jewelry, nice homes and clothes, and in some cases funneling money back to Somalia to pay for a terrorist group, Al-Shabaab, and all under the, open eyes of Minnesota lawmakers who, reports City Journal and the New York Times in a pair of reports, knew. They knew they were being defrauded, but didn't want to say anything because they were worried about being called racist, Mark.
The parallel is to this horrible thing that's happened in the UK with immigrants molesting children. And government officials say the same thing. Well, we didn't do anything because we didn't want to appear to be racist or prejudiced. This story is so outrageous that the New York Times wrote one of the most fair anti-democratic stories that I've ever read in the paper about what's happened. And as you said, all these charities, all these government programs, government-funded programs, and in many cases, government funding private groups, some coming out of COVID, they just created fraudulent schemes, fake patients, fake students, young people with diseases and afflictions. And they just basically said, we help these 100 kids, so give us all the money that we should get from the government. And as you said, they would the Democrats would see the cookie jar being robbed, and then they put more cookies back in the same jar and then turn their backs again. This is a massive scandal, and the scale, it's not just kind of symbolic. The scale of it is like $1 billion in Minnesota alone for the fraud in these programs. As you said, most of the people who've been charged by the U.S. attorney are from the Somali community. Now, many of them are American citizens, either born here or naturalized. But as you said, many also have ties back to Somalia. And the Democrats don't really have an explanation for how this happened, except to say, as you did, well, we didn't want to appear racist. We didn't want to appear prejudiced. This is an important community in our state. It's a massive ripoff of the taxpayers, massive, and a massive repudiation of the notion that you can just hand out government money and hope for the best that people aren't going to commit fraud.
Oh, I don't even know if it was a hope for the best situation. I watched this one guy who's part of the Democratic lawmaking crew. I think he's a Republican, but he's part of the State House in Minnesota over the weekend. And he was like, they all knew. Everyone knew. We've all been jumping up and down about this for years. They just didn't care. They just decided it was in their interest group to funnel the money to this interest group that paid for them. All these Somali immigrants are voting Democrat. And he was saying it doesn't make any sense because if you look at their values on paper, they sound more like Republicans. Culturally, the Somali crew is not exactly far left. They like school choice, he said, is their number one most important issue. So why are they voting Democrat? Because of this. Because they're giving them cash giveaways. Here's a tweet put out by the Minnesota Department of Homeland Security. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long. Hold on, actually, I have it here. Okay. Again, just a couple highlights. Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud. But no, we got the opposite response. He systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by him. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. This is a cascade of systemic failures leading up to Tim Walz. Then they go on, there's a little bit more. Fundamentally, Tim Walz is dishonest, lacks ethics and integrity, has poor leadership abilities, and has never taken accountability for his role in fraud. Instead, he deflects by blaming national politics for his own failings. That's exactly right. As far as I can see, and they thank the New York Times for bringing the plight of Minnesota to the national stage. I have to say, Mark, I think Tim Walz is done. I think this will bring him down. He's running for a third term. I think it's over for him. What do you think? Well,
the current speaker, Republican speakers, is going to probably be the Republican nominee, I think, and whoever their nominee is, I think it's hard to win a third term. And this story is going to continue to reverberate around the state. It is more of a blue state than a purple state, though. So for whatever reasons he got elected twice, maybe he can win again. But certainly he's imperiled, and certainly the threads on this are going to continue to be pulled. But I'm not ready to predict he's going to lose. But he's obviously now in a very tough political position. When the New York Times does a very long, big story calling into question your competence and maybe your ideology, it's a sign of trouble for sure.
What did you make of the City Journal report followed a few days later by the New York Times report? I was like, first of all, go City Journal. But what do you think New York Times been working on this and got scooped?
Good question.
Or they hustled to get, because a lot of these facts have been out there.
It's a good question. The timing, obviously, probably not coincidence because they're so close together. The question of the money being used to go overseas to fund criminal activity, I still want to see more documentation on that. It's certainly suggestive, but I'd like to see more because it's obviously a huge charge and a potentially massive story.
Well, I tip my hat to the good folks of City Journal who are ahead of a lot of the mainstream news reporting, and that is a publication well worth your time, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Halperin stays with us. We will be right back, and there's a lot more news to get to. Stand by. Ever read the label on a typical bag of chips? It's often a science experiment of seed oils, MSG, artificial dyes, and mystery ingredients. Masa is part of the growing movement to bring back real food. Masa chips contain just 3 ingredients: organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. Not only do these chips avoid the bad stuff, they also taste delicious too. Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Masa, you feel satisfied, light, and energetic with no crash and no bloat. And if you love Masa, then you will love Vandy Crisps. Vandy, which is Masa's sister company, makes the most delicious 3-ingredient potato chips, too. Ready to give Masa or Vandy a try? Use code MK for 25% off your first order at masachips.com or vandycrisps.com, or simply click the link in the video description or scan the QR code to claim this delicious offer. Don't feel like ordering online? Masa and Vandy are now available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. Stop by and pick a couple of bags up before they're all gone. Mark Halperin is back with me. He is the host of Next Up with Mark Halperin on MK Media. Go and subscribe. Get it on YouTube, youtube.com/AT Next Up. Not AT, at. I feel like Ron Burgundy. You got to do the at is what he's trying to tell me in this prompter. It's youtube.com/at, like the at sign, Next Up Halperin. Okay. I don't know why they did that, Mark Halperin, but it's
Can I
annoying.
tell you the best story about that I heard the other day? It's about someone we both know, but I'm not going to say who it is. When this person was reading prompter, and it was a story about the Hague, and this person was reading the prompter and said, blah, 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 the Hagu, they said.
Oh,
the
no.
Hagu. Yeah.
No.
The Hagu. Makes me laugh every time.
Abby hates when I tell this story, but I have to tell it because she's so fun. Abby's very smart, but she has this weird thing with pronunciations that she's laughing. She has like a mental block on certain pronunciations and certain words. And one time Mark Siegel was sitting on the set with me at Fox, and he had like updated his thoughts. I don't know what she was bringing me, but she was bringing me something about the segment that we were doing. And what it said, what it was about was, reverse. She had to transcribe something, a medical presser that had just happened, and give it to me while I was interviewing Mark Siegel. And the document she brought out that she had typed up said, they said she suffered a grandma seizure.
That's, if you're going to have a Caesar, it's one of the best ones to have.
Totally.
But it's still, that's a good
so
one.
much better than like the mean uncle seizure.
Or the meat kin down the block seizure. There's all sorts of bad ones, but the grandma one, that's awesome. I love that.
No, it's like, it's kind of nice to you and gives you a bunch of candy at the end.
Pinches your cheeks. Take some saliva.
Speaking of grandparents.
Yeah.
Back to Tim Walz, because we can't leave that story without me showing the following war between, I'll get into this in one second, between Trump and Walz. But here's Walz trying to like do damage control on this on Meet the Press. I don't think he understands what that term means. Here he is with Kristen Welker, SOT 19.
Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Certainly, I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
I see. So they're so well run that the criminals were attracted to Minnesota. And it's not all Somalis. It's literally hundreds of Somalis, except for the 8 who are non-Somali. So don't generalize, Mark. He, too, has gotten the research paper on don't alienate the Somalis. They're still voting for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's very reminiscent of how he handled controversies during his vice presidential campaign, which is he's got some stuff to say and he hopes the parade moves on before anybody asks a follow-up question. I did a little checking during the break. Minnesota used to have 2-year terms for governor. They don't anymore, 4-year terms, no term limits, but no one's ever won a third term. No one has ever successfully been a third term 4-year governor. And I think he might not break the streak after that answer. If
they vote for him, they deserve what they're getting at this point. But so here was a little war of words between Trump and President Trump and Governor Walz. Which is the opening shot? It's actually the opening shot was in a Truth Social in which President Trump called Tim Walz retarded. He used the word, quote, retarded. And then Tim Walz responded to that again on Meet the Press. I think it's SOT 20.
Look, Donald Trump insulting me is a badge of honor for me, but I think we all know, both as an educator for a couple decades and as a parent, using that term is just so damaging. It's hurtful.
Is it?
This is cruelness. This is meanness. It's aimed at a broader community. And as far as demonizing our Somali community, maybe he could help us on some things. Demonizing an entire community, folks who are in the professions, educators, artists, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, they bring the diversity and the energy to a place like Minnesota. And for him to just randomly decide to do this, it makes no sense. Do your job. Get the criminals out. Secure our border. But do it with dignity and respect to the American tradition of respecting immigrants and refugees as a beacon of hope.
Okay, Trump shutting down immigration from third world countries was not done randomly. It was done in the wake of this reporting and the shooting of these 2 National Guardsmen by an Afghani national over the weekend. It wasn't random. But let me just give you the last piece of the story, which is Trump then responding to that chastising from Tim Walz on Air Force One Sunday night, SOT 2.
You called him what many Americans do find an offensive word, retarded. Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz retarded?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
But you don't think
you have a problem with it? You know what? I think there's something wrong with him. Anybody that would do what he did, anybody that would allow those people into his state and pay billions of dollars out to Somalia. Yeah, there's something wrong with Walz.
Okay, so Trump's defense is he actually is slow. He's not even taking on the issue that term is offensive to some. He's like, but it's real. I'm telling you, he's slow. Which is
anyone who
classic Trump.
I was going to say anyone who spent any time with Donald Trump is zero surprised at that response.
He's not sorry, no. Mark. You're shocked?
No. He's not even sorry, not sorry. He's just not sorry.
Oh no, not sorry. And I have to say, I've been thinking about that word because a lot of people are starting to use that word again. I don't mean to be too philosophical about it, but I do think it's one of those it's a message word. It's not really like anybody wants to make fun of people who are slow when it comes to brain development. It's that they're sick and tired of being told what they can and cannot say. That term was used for decades, without it. No one's trying to actually say something negative about that community. They're trying to say something about the person they're targeting, that they're kind of slow. And this is a way of saying we're done being word policed. I think that's why Trump says it too.
Yeah, and also it's a word that he grew up using, I'm sure, because when he was a kid, that was a word people used. So, again, I'm not surprised by it. I'm always against word policing, just as a general matter. So,
Yeah, and it never works with Donald Trump. Yeah. I can speak to that firsthand. Yeah. Just don't go there. He's not going to be moved by you.
No matter how good your research is.
One of the things we love about
No matter how good your research is, no matter how high profile the debate moment, he will not be moved by the word police.
That's right. But this wound up being a great strength of his as things turned out. Okay, speaking of the National Guard soldiers who were shot, that tweet that Trump sent out, or Truth Social, in the wake of this tragedy, these two poor young National Guardsmen, 120, 124, the 20-year-old now dead, the 24-year-old still fighting for his life. I don't know. It doesn't sound good, Mark. No. The perpetrator shot and expected to make it, shot by a third National Guardsman. But now Trump sends out this Truth Social, which is just, it is a barn burner. And I have to say, it may be, in the view of many Americans, the best thing he's done since becoming president for the second time. I'm going to read just a couple highlights, very long, but here are the highlights. He's talking about how he's going to get rid of these migrants and asylum seekers. And he says, a migrant earning 30 grand with a green card will get roughly 50 grand in yearly benefits for their family. As an example, hundreds of thousands of refugees from Somalia are completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota. Somalian gangs are roving the streets looking for prey as our wonderful people stay locked in their apartments and houses, hoping against hope that they will be left alone. The seriously retarded governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing. And on we go. Then he says, I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, terminate all of the millions of Biden illegal admissions, including those signed by Sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the U.S. or who's incapable of loving our country. I will end all federal benefits and subsidies to non-citizens of our country, denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility, and deport any foreign national who is a public charge, security risk, or non-compatible with Western civilization. I don't know whether any of that or all of it is true, but I think most Republicans would say, shoot into my veins. That's exactly what I voted for.
Yeah, and not just only Republicans, some independents, some Democrats. That's been Donald Trump's core message for a while, and very informed by the experience with Europe. Europe is dealing with all of these problems, in some ways more severe than what the United States has dealt with. Whatever laws might be broken by what the president's suggesting, whatever traditions, whatever norms, whatever downsides there are, the coalition that elected him president 2 out of 3 times is well on board with that philosophy about what America needs to do to be safe and prosperous. So there are tens of millions who don't like what the president wrote, but there are tens of millions who do. And again, no one should be surprised that that's his reaction to what occurred.
And we talked about the Gallup poll earlier, which had an overall not great approval number for Trump. But one of the areas in which he's still very much holding on is immigration. So you tell me whether this retort to that Truth Social by Mark Kelly, who's one of the so-called seditious six in connection with that Pete Hegseth story we covered earlier, but also has decided to weigh in on this whole thing with the National Guardsmen as well. Tell me whether this is effective, given those poll numbers. SOT 9.
This is kind of more of the same from this president. When he says things like third world countries, what is he really saying? I think what he's saying is he doesn't want brown people in our country.
Mark?
If he wants to get the squad's endorsement for president, it could be effective.
Is that what that is?
It's more than that. It's the belief of the Democratic Party about Donald Trump. They believe he's motivated by racism. It's what they think about Stephen Miller too. They think they're bigots who want America to be an all-white country, when that's not what they want. But Mark Kelly is enunciating the view of Blue America about President Trump's view on immigration.
This is just like, honestly, it's so tired. It's so worn. It doesn't work. It's like, okay, you can keep trying to, use those plays out of the old playbook, but you use them to try to get a woman elected president, and it failed. What would make you think it's going to work better now on an issue that Trump, notwithstanding his overall sagging numbers, still has huge support on? So, okay, I guess that's what they're going to do. There's more of that coming, you'll be shocked, from Jasmine Crockett on MS Now. Here's SOT 10.
And the idea that one person can get out of line and commit such a horrific crime as shooting two National Guardsmen that never, ever asked to be here. In fact, we know the young lady that lost her life, specifically, we're saying that this is a waste of time, but now you want to go against every single immigrant. That doesn't make sense. And it's frankly not who we are, because if that's the case, let's talk about the white supremacists and how many of them need to be kicked out of this country, because I can guarantee you I can track down more crimes that they've committed, because overall immigrants have a lower crime committal rate than white supremacists. But we don't want to talk about that in this country.
Overall, I love that. Overall, yes, because there are indeed still more Americans in America than there are immigrants, madam. But once again, playing the race card there, and a bunch of disinformation as she does it. Trump prioritizing deporting migrants instead of white supremacists. Your thoughts on her?
Well, I have to confess, in the last 3 weeks, Representative Crockett has become a guilty pleasure for me. I love watching her on TV and watching how her mind works as it connects to her mouth. I really do. It's just something mesmerizing about how she takes questions and spins them back with it's not word salad, it's like word pad thai. It's a lot of complexities. There's different flavors, textures all in there. So it's hard for me to analyze what she says, because I watch her like this. For those listening on the podcast version, I dropped my mouth in slack-jawed disbelief. I mean, it's incredible the things she says, and she's still thinking of running for statewide office, which I would look forward to.
And by the way, that reference she made to the National Guards woman who was killed, thinking it was pointless or a waste of time to be doing this in D.C. is way, way out of context, and shame on her for doing that to a newly fallen soldier. What the woman said, Sarah, was that it's pointless if they're not going to let us actually do law enforcement. She wanted to have the reins taken off of her and the other National Guardsmen. She wanted to do more law enforcement. She was upset over, these constant crackdowns on them, not to be able to do anything to actually help the city of D.C. So that's a Democrat problem, Jasmine Crockett. That's not a complaint that she was there in the first place. It was a request for people like you to try to take the reins off so that the National Guard can do what they're capable of doing. But who would expect media honesty from her? Okay, you mentioned Stephen Miller, and he's kind of in the news today because of his wife, Katie Miller, who went on CNN and had a very interesting exchange with Abby Phillip, who tries to act like she's just totally benign, just totally neutral. It's just the facts that make her always come down on the side of the Democrats. It's not her bias. It's just the facts. She can't be in charge of the fact that all the facts run in favor of Democrats. That's just how it goes. So they had an exchange on her show, and I'll just let it play out. You'll get it. This is Friday night, SOT 26.
Wait, you have Jennifer Welch on your show very often, and you've never pushed back as she has called my husband a white nationalist.
Hold on.
That is no
Katie.
different than Nick Fuentes going on Tucker Carlson's show. It's not, and you should admit it.
Well, hold on. Wait, hold on. How is it anything similar? It's not remotely similar at all. Nick Fuentes sits around and says that he likes Hitler. How is that similar
What does Katie have to do with it? What does she have to do with it?
Hold on.
She has nothing to do with it. Literally nothing.
Scott, Katie is the person who just said to me that it is comparable to say that Nick Fuentes, who is literally a neo-Nazi, is the same as somebody, a liberal, who has an opinion, who is not a neo-Nazi. They are not
a hateful opinion.
The same.
How do you want? Excuse me.
Let's
go back to this point one more time.
But
Nick
Katie,
Fuentes can espouse an opinion on Tucker Carlson's show.
It is not the same.
And he didn't push back the same way you didn't push back when someone called someone in my family
Hold on
Nazi.
a second.
It's not different.
Hold on a second.
It's not.
If someone comes on this show and says, I love Hitler and I admire what he did, they would never, first of all, I would never invite them on the show and they would never be invited back. So those two things are not the same.
But yet you've gone on Jennifer Welch's podcast. It's the same thing.
Okay, so Jennifer Welch came up. I think I said that's Stephen Miller's wife, Katie Miller, but also she was on Doge. She's an independent professional in her own right and a podcast host. That Jennifer Welch, who I'm just now getting to see in these podcast clips, who is possibly the most hateful person in the national dialogue today. It's like tough to say, but even Joy Reid is more joyful than this woman. She's truly deeply, deeply hateful of everybody on Team Red. Here's just a sampling of this person who Abby Phillip is totally fine with, has on her show repeatedly, went on this woman's show herself, Abby Phillip did. Not hateful. See, Stephen Miller, hateful. Jennifer Welsh, not hateful. That's Abby Phillip's world. Here, watch.
Shockingly, the conservatives that I thought were just crusty old white people have morphed into this young group of misogynists. And I can tell you, when I'm around white people, they test the racist water. They test it on people like you all. Stephen Miller is a Nazi, and he is a sociopath. He is a little insecure white supremacist. This guy was bullied in high school, and he's unattractive, and he's 4'10", and nobody fucking likes him. You get to J.D. Vance, who is a failed drag queen, because little Moses Mike Grinder Johnson worships two things: Donald Trump and his closeted life. For this dementia-ridden, diaper-wearing sack of shit, he started off his 60 Minutes interview by saying, "I am not a Nazi." Okay? He clearly is a Nazi. People that triple Trump should be banned, boycotted from enjoying the best thing that America has to offer, which is multiculturalism. Get your fat asses out of the Mexican restaurant. Get your fat asses over to Cracker Barrel, because nobody wants to see your fucking smug ass, teeny weeny, pink arm, big gut around. Nobody wants to see that shit. No one.
You got it? Not hateful. It's fine. Abby Phillip that's just a liberal with an opinion. That's how she described her. Stephen Miller, with his immigration crackdown, supported by the vast majority of Americans, hateful. Clearly, Abby Phillip has no problem with him being called a white supremacist or a Nazi, because she was actually on Jennifer Welch's show when Jennifer said that directly to Abby Phillip. Fine. Your thoughts?
I just think the left has to play by the same rules as they want the right to play by, and if they want to be the police of who can speak on the national town square, then they need to recognize that they've got policing to do in their backyard as well. And right now, that's just not how they feel, and they should, because they should either let everybody speak or they should police their own side.
But here's what's happening there. I mean, you're being polite, but Abby Phillip finds absolutely nothing wrong with what that woman said. I guarantee you she agrees with all of it. Yeah. She's a fan of this Welsh person. And so she wants her to come on her show, I think 4 times we counted. She said yes to going on this person's show. Then this woman, do we have the soundbite, you guys? I don't know where we are, but like in the SOT lineup. But she went on her show, and the woman said it directly to her. Here's that. Listen to this. There was no pushback. Here's what Abby Phillip tried to just sort of say. Oh, gee, I don't know what's in his head. Gee, could be white supremacist. Who can know? Watch.
Stephen Miller is a white supremacist. I mean, he is, and he's basically running the White House. They keep Trump busy with his decorating projects. He's got building the arch now. He's got his Oval Office design. And then you have these real sociopaths that are real anti-Semites, true white supremacists like Stephen Miller. And even though he's Jewish, he's like a Nazi Jew.
Well, look, I can't speak to what Stephen Miller's motivations are.
You're such an asshole. I'm sorry, but Abby Phillip is a fucking asshole. She let her call him a Nazi Jew and just said, I'm sorry, but I can't speak to what his motivations are. What a cowardly dodge, just to try to maintain some semblance of objectivity. The only proper response to that is, come on, hold it. We can criticize his immigration policy all day long if you want. Don't call him a Nazi Jew. That's disgusting.
Well, she calls balls and strikes. She's never seen a Democrat throw anything but a strike.
She's going to have her glasses readjusted really soon. But this is the mainstream of CNN, Mark. Yeah. This is the reinvented, more mainstream, moderate CNN. That's truly one of the faces of it.
If Paramount buys them and Ellison, enacts his vision, I'd be surprised if she's still in that job.
Good. Get her, Ellison. Go, Barry. You can do some crossover programming. They're going to need your help. Get her. Get rid of her. And by the way, she will fail in the independent lane because she has no personality. She has a lot of bias and no personality. It's a bad combo, actually, but perfect.
She's making our
CNN.
friend Scott Jennings rich.
Well, that's good. We're in favor of that. But he can go on some other loser show at CNN for that when she gets fired. Something else happened on regular TV, CNN, with Abby Phillip that actually is kind of interesting. And that is the son of Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas went on. And reportedly, as Maureen would say, allegedly, did not do that well, to the point where, hold on, I'm just going to give you the headline before we play it. The parents are said to be so furious with CNN that they intend to blacklist the entire network moving forward. Now you're having Scott Jennings weigh in on this and others as well. This is from a debate that happened on November 10th, but is only now causing
Can I ask you a question
the response?
before
Yeah,
you play
can.
Because I skimmed the New York Post story. What does their son do for a living? Like, why was he on CNN?
It's funny you should ask. He is host of SiriusXM's Young Americans with Dylan Douglas and a 2022 graduate of Brown University, which is pretty much all we need to know about him.
Was going to guess Wesleyan, but okay.
His Gen Z political show airs Saturdays at 10 a.m. Must have missed it. Okay. What were you going to say,
I said
Mark?
I would have guessed Wesleyan, but Brown's okay.
Brown. I mean, it literally, there's no school in the nation to which I would less want to, I would, there's no school worse than Brown when it comes to Woketopia. They're number one. They're worse than Columbia. They're number one.
Oberlin is number one.
No, what's worse about Oberlin? I know they're terrible.
Do you know the story?
They've been ensconced in scandal. But truly, I think Brown is an outpost for Hamas. I think that's almost literally true. Almost. But they're so bad.
Oberlin's bad. Oberlin's really bad.
Come on.
Yeah.
Oberlin is not, like, if you...
Let's go undercover.
People say, like...
Let's go undercover. Could we post... Do you think we could both pass for college students? Let's go undercover.
Here's what I'd like to do. Go undercover as a Jewish American and go to Brown University. And, like, if I were a man, I'd wear the yarmulke. I'd do, like, something to make it obvious, because they are breeding anti-Semites, in my opinion, at Brown University. It's disgusting. It's worse than any place.
All right, let's do this. Let's get a makeup artist who can turn you into an Orthodox Jewish man, and I'll get a camera.
I think we just have to take off the makeup and then wear, like, the right hair.
Let's go to Brown, and we'll go to the Hillel, and then you'll walk out, and we'll just shoot the whole thing and see what happens.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll be lucky if I make it across campus, because that university is disgusting. In any event, back to Mr. Douglas, Dylan, that is, who's the dual Nepo baby. And this is look at this. This is reportedly what has his parents so irate over his, quote, humiliation, allegedly at the hands of CNN, that they're going to boycott the network. Here.
Like, you cannot put on the American people that Democrats were the one that were hurting people, making this plight.
Who was casting the votes against opening the government, Democrats or Republicans?
Who was
casting the votes?
Scott, who was wanting to cut SNAP benefits?
Nobody.
And who was playing up SNAP benefits after two courts ruled that it was unallowed?
Republicans voted to fund SNAP 15 times. Democrats voted to defund it 15 times.
You talk about the Affordable Health Care Act. Okay,
it's terrible.
Landmark legislation is not perfect. We understand that Democrats, Republicans, Independents, 70% of Americans, not Democrats, not just Independents, 70% of Americans believe that they should increase those subsidies past the deadmark of December, the COVID era subsidy benefits. So it's a huge, huge thing that Democrats, Republicans, 70% agree with. And look, when it comes to the government shutdown, I was of the persuasion that to go for it, I didn't really get it. Democrats wanted a fight. They got a fight. Chuck Schumer, back in last year, didn't fight. He got a lot of flack for it, particularly in his home state of New York. So they wanted a fight, but they found a fight that was worth fighting with talking about the Affordable Health Care Act. People were with them. Democrats were leading in the polls. We won big on Tuesday.
That's what it was for, right? It was for the election, right?
Well, I think we should have kept going. What I don't understand, and which I would love others to help me out understand, I don't understand why we caved so soon when the American people seemed to be on our
Because the
side.
election ended. You just said it. It was for the election.
Listen.
The election ended. Then you caved.
That's it?
Seemed like normal, like whatever. I'm booking him on Next Up, by the way. Right now.
Are you?
Now.
You should.
Right
Will
now.
you do
I'm
it?
trying right now as we speak. I'm using my hand off camera to text the booker and say, I want that kid.
I actually would listen to that.
Yeah.
Let's see if he does any better with you. He didn't do well. I mean, that's clear. He wasn't substantive, and he didn't have his talking points lined up, never mind actual substance. But did anyone expect any different? Like, why did they think their 22-year-old son would go on to CNN across from the Scott Jennings of the world and do well? Why did they think that?
I mean, I don't know. For a liberal in a CNN pundit slot, I didn't think he was so bad. I mean, it wasn't great, but I didn't feel like he was.
I mean, with those qualifiers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
I could
honestly,
name names.
22.
I could name names, but I mean, I thought whatever, like grading on the normal curve. I don't know. If I were his parents, maybe they didn't like the part in his hair. I would redo the hair. Did he have a center part? Did he have a center part?
Exposes something. No, it never works. Not on a man. Yeah. I have a center part. It's good
on it.
But it doesn't work.
But am I right that he had a center part?
Can we roll the tape again? I need to see it now.
Maybe I'm wrong. I thought he had a center part.
Stand by.
No,
it requires investigation. It's important.
I agree.
That Democrats were the one that were hurting people, making this plight.
Kind of.
Who was casting the votes against opening the government?
It's pretty center.
Democrats or
It's
Republicans?
centery and it's
Who was
indistinct.
a little girl?
Who was casting the votes?
Scott, who's one of the
great.
snap in?
So if my son said,
He doesn't have
my
it.
son said, I'm going up against Scott Jennings and I'm going to have a center part, I'd say no. Let's pick a side. Let's
First of all, right, show up like a man with a real opinion and a real part. But I think this espouses like so much about Hollywood. I think those two are used to everybody genuflecting when they walk by, never mind their offspring with the dual royalty of Hollywood legends, at least Michael Douglas aside. But Catherine Zeta-Jones is no slouch in her own right when it comes to Hollywood fame, success, and movies and so on. And they're horrified. They don't understand what it's like to be in our lane.
Yeah, totally agree.
I mean, honestly, it's
totally agree.
Right? They don't, like, it's a day ending in Y to have multiple negative stories written about you that are not true, to have people say the most vile things. This guy had mild pushback by Scott Jennings in a segment for which he was not prepared. Who cares? Like, look what happened with Katie Miller the other day. Like, they should not allow their 22-year-old son to be out there if their skin is this thin.
And I'll say, in my dealing with Hollywood people around politics and, and public policy, they're pretty thin-skinned. They just want to be told they're right. So I'm not surprised that they thought their precious little bundle was overwhelmed in the rough and tumble of a CNN set with Scott Jennings.
Well, while we're on the university set, Brown, Oberlin, and Dylan Douglas, let's take a march across the pond, I guess a sail across the pond, to see what's happening with the now ex-elected president of the Oxford Union. This guy, George Aberonier, got elected to be the head of the president of the Oxford Union, the debate club, which is historic and has been around for a long, long time. And months earlier, before Charlie Kirk's death, he debated Charlie. And Charlie crushed him. It was beautiful. Charlie, this guy who never graduated college, never went to college, up against this Oxford kid who was the, now elected head of the debate society. And Charlie swept the floor with him. It was great. And right after Charlie was shot, and as you know, we were on the air together, it was clear right from the moment that first, not even the most terrible video hit, but the first video hit, that this was obviously a very severe situation and life-threatening at a minimum. And instead of recognizing that, this guy, George Aberonier, who had debated in a gentlemanly fashion against Charlie didn't, throw shots under the belt or anything like that, celebrated it. We have it? I thought it was just a tweet. Tweeting out something like, it's wild, wow, LOL, that Charlie got shot. And now he decided to sit down with the British outlet LBC and tried to justify his disgusting tweets, again, which were totally insensitive to Charlie, to his then wife, now widow Erica, to his children, to the community that loved Charlie and supported him, who he knew was suffering when he did all this, but had absolutely no compunctions about doing it anyway. And now here he is trying to explain why he sent out the repeated tweets.
A stupid and kind of silly thing for me to say. I reacted to kind of a notification and the headline. I had no real context for, what happened. I didn't really understand the severity of the situation. I reacted poorly, and then upon kind of realizing just how serious kind of these things were, I kind of deleted everything. I posted on my social media kind of apologizing.
Because there'll be some people listening saying, well, did you really need to know how severe the situation was? I mean, you knew a guy who you'd met had got shot.
Of course, and I think it's a valid position. I think.
Why did you?
I think part of Mr. Kirk's comments don't exist in a vacuum, He's an incredibly kind of polarizing figure, and I think it's almost a symptom of him, and my reaction, a symptom of kind of how we have discourse online in which, it's oftentimes very reactive. It's oftentimes about saying something almost inflammatory, almost because I wanted to spark a conversation about kind of what happened, the fact that, oh my God, this is such a major event that's just taken place. And
you wanted to get a reaction.
Exactly, I wanted to get a reaction. I wanted to have a conversation and,
a laugh?
Almost exactly, like a laugh and a bit of a reaction. And kind of, I realized afterwards that, that wasn't the right way to go about it.
Oh my God, Mark, the original tweets are, Charlie Kirk got shot, let's fucking go. He posted on WhatsApp shortly after the shooting. Charlie Kirk got shot, LOOOL, he added on Instagram. It was repeated. This is not, there was a melee at the Charlie Kirk event. There was a gun that went off. He knew Charlie got shot. And now this idiot interviewer lets him get away with, I didn't realize how serious it was. And the fact that this guy's even still, I think he's still at Oxford. He did eventually get a vote of no confidence to be president of the Debate Society for this year. But he's at Oxford right now and given a total pass for those comments.
I mean, the original behavior on social media is just so abhorrent. But to then decide to sit for an interview where the ostensible premise is to explain what you did and to come so ill-prepared and to make the whole thing just worse and more grotesque, I find it to be one of the saddest things. And of course, the premise of his defense is that Charlie was some evil, polarizing monster, which, in the months since he's died, the left and the media has had all this time to produce evidence that Charlie was a bigoted, hateful person. And of course they haven't, because he wasn't, and they can't. And yet that's what he brings to the table as his defense. Well, I could say these things because Charlie was such a hateful person. Just makes me sick.
It's disgusting. So this was LBC is leading Britain's conversation with Lewis Goodall. Lewis, you failed. That was a disgusting display. That was a pathetic attempt at actually holding him to account for what he, in fact, wrote in those two posts. And I didn't realize how serious it was when the tweets themselves say Charlie got shot. Fuck you, Lewis. You fell down on the job and you humiliated yourself. Humiliated yourself against a true villain, too, which makes it especially egregious. Stand by. Mark Halpern returns after this quick break. I've been talking a lot about Riverbend Ranch because I love their steaks. Well, this holiday season, express your love with a very special gift of premium steaks from Riverbend Ranch. They have spectacular beef bundles that are wonderful gifts to friends and family. Their prime rib roast and holiday bundles are only available while supplies last, and they're going fast. For the last 35 years, Riverbend Ranch has been creating an elite Angus herd by using ultrasound technology to identify genetically superior cattle with a focus on flavor and tenderness. All Riverbend Ranch cattle are born and raised in the USA. They never use growth hormones or antibiotics, and the beef is processed right at the ranch in their award-winning USDA-inspected processing facility. Avoid the costly middlemen because the beef is sent directly from Riverbend Ranch to your home. This is not your average black Angus beef. Order from riverbendranch.com. Use the promo code Megyn for $20 off your first order, and let me know what you think. riverbendranch.com, promo code Megyn. We talk a lot about personal responsibility on this show. Well, here's one aspect that's really important: your health. And I'm not talking about following whatever the experts recommend. I'm talking about real, data-driven decisions based on your body's actual numbers. We demand transparency in government, but most of us have no idea what's happening inside of our own bodies, never mind inside of D.C. Disease can develop silently for years before symptoms appear. By then, you're playing catch-up with expensive treatments instead of preventing problems when they're cheap and easy to fix. Well, I want to tell you about Gevity. They are revolutionizing preventative care with something radically different. 100-plus blood markers tested at your home. Personalized supplement packs shipped directly to you based on your deficiencies. Biannual retesting to track progress, plus ongoing virtual consultations on your schedule. This is healthcare independence. And you get 20% off at gogevity.com/Megyn with code Megyn when you check out. That's gogeviti.com/Megyn, because no one should control your health decisions but you. Tomorrow is election day, not in very many places, but in some places, including in Tennessee, where there is a U.S. House seat up for grabs right now. The Republican who held the district has retired to go be part of the private sector, but was apparently facing some sort of a scandal anyway, so he's out. And now this Afton Bain, who's a Democrat, she's currently serving in the Tennessee State House as a representative, is running for now to be a member of the U.S. Congress against a Republican who would seem to be a shoo-in. I think this district went, 30 points or something like that, overwhelmingly to the Republican last time around. The Democrats now say it would be like a victory if they could get it to, within 10 points, this race. But this woman who they are running is an apparent lunatic. We covered her on AM Update last week before we went on vacay. But here she is, we didn't get to this soundbite, outside of the Tennessee State House, where she was trying to make some sort of a point, but looked much more like our children when they were toddlers. Here it is. She's trying to barge into the, I think it's the Speaker's office. Sorry, the governor's. That's her screaming.
Are you okay? Sir, that was completely unnecessary.
Then the video goes on for another 2 minutes with her just sitting on the floor moaning, just rocking and moaning like a drama queen, like you're trying to play it up for the cameras. And now this woman who says she can't stand Nashville, she hates is running for a Congress position that would represent Nashville among other areas in Tennessee. And you tell me whether the Democrats have any shot at actually winning or coming within their alleged goal of keeping the race relatively tight.
Well, you never know for sure. It's hard to poll special elections. She's unlikely to win, and largely because of the makeup of the district, very pro-Trump. But she will outperform Kamala Harris in the district. And so assuming she's not going to win, I don't think it matters that she's going, how close she comes. I think what matters is why is she coming close? Because as that clip and many others I've seen suggest, I haven't had a chance to go out there and watch for myself, she's not a very good candidate. Sometimes, you can overperform in a district if you're a Democrat in a Republican district because you're awesome. She's not, although her media is pretty good. Her paid ads are pretty good. So I think that the issue here are the issues that are resonating in this race that are allowing a liberal Democrat to overperform in a very red district. Will those be the issues that resonate next year? And if you look at her campaign ads, particularly the last couple, they could be Donald Trump ads from 2024. All the issues she's talking about in terms of being anti-Washington, pro-change, worried about working class voters, they're all Trump rhetoric. Doesn't have the same solutions, but they're all Trump rhetoric. So I think the important thing is to see how close she comes as a measure of just how potent these set of issues might be for Democrats next year, because every Democrat's going to run on the same issues she's running on.
What I think is interesting about this person, and again, last week's AM Update, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, had a lot of sound bites from her. She's a nut. But what I think is interesting is, to me, this seems to be like a trend for Democrats. Like, I think they're leaning into crazy. They seem to like this. They seem to think, oh, she'll get attention. Like she's going to get clicks, like that crazy podcaster, Jennifer, Welsh. This seems to work for them, they think, in like generating enthusiasm. So is that the future of the Democrat Party?
Well, I think some of her quote unquote crazy stuff maybe not helping her. and maybe not why they're attracted to her. I'll tell you what I do see, and I mentioned this before, the quality of her ads. She's very good on camera in controlled situations, like Mondami, right? Like Zoran Mondami. So I think they're looking for people who are good on social, good on video, who can, get attention, right? And she's gotten attention. The last ad, I think it's her last ad of the campaign, at the very closing shot, she winks at the camera. And it's very affecting. You could, whether you like her or hate her, or care about her politics, you can't help. She's very watchable. And I think you're seeing not just Democrats, but everybody in politics gravitating towards watchable. Because that's one thing that Donald Trump has as part of his success. You can't teach it, you can't package it. But if you find candidates who have it, it's a big advantage because you got to get people to pay attention. And Trump has shown the way in how to do that.
Well, that leads us back to your friend, Jasmine Crockett,
yes.
your girlfriend, who you can't take your eyes off of when she's on the camera, on the screen.
She's my guilty pleasure, not my girlfriend.
But I think you would say she's watchable.
Yeah,
but I mean, what of the fact that these two women are watchable for all the wrong reasons? As a woman, I have to tell you, I object. I object to their stupidity, to their drama. They're giving all of us a bad name.
Yeah, and they're giving, to some extent, they're giving, substantive politicians a bad name. But what's incredible about her is Mondami is consistently a pretty good performer. He had a bad second debate, but she is. I've talked to people who've been on TV with her. She's not a good performer except in these controlled
Crockett
situations.
Or this other gal in Tennessee?
Crockett, I don't know. I need more data. But this woman in Tennessee, she's good when she's packaged, and that's something, because a lot of politics can be packaged. I'm surrounded by people with divergent views on AOC and whether she'll be a strong presidential candidate. But there's no doubt that those who think she'll be a strong candidate if she runs see in her, just the attention economy, the capacity to get folks to listen to what she has to say. It's quite high with her, and that's something, because Governor Beshear ain't got that.
So what do you think, Mark? We started the show by talking about where Trump's polling is right now, that Gallup poll, and some of the problems that the Republican Party is facing at the moment. Yes, they have 12 months, just about 11 months, I guess, to work it out. I mean, if Trump can get some better economic numbers, and not just get the numbers, but actually make people feel like things have gotten better, is that all going to turn around? Like, what if he called you up tomorrow, Mark, and said, "What should I do?" What do you say?
I'd say talk to someone who knows. But then I'll tell you secretly on Megyn Kelly. I think the economy, which is, of course, it's a truism, it's always the biggest issue. But I think there's just a big gap now between how people feel about the economy and the better parts of the economy. And so I think I'm really, I don't want to waste December. I won't be sitting around doing nothing. But I'm really focused on State of the Union, because I think State of the Union is when he'll get massive audience and he'll get a chance to say, here's my theory of the case. Here's what's worked so far. Here's what hasn't. And tariffs will be a big part of that. The relationship with China will be a big part of that. But so will all these questions about what is America's economy going to be? Are we going to be a manufacturing country? Are we going to be a big exporter? How are we going to make people feel better about their kids' economic future? And I don't think currently he's explaining that in a very linear way.
Mark, you're not going to believe this. My crack team just forwarded me a new Emerson College poll, /The Hill. It has that Tennessee race within 2 points.
Yep.
It has the Republican up to Matt Van Epps and this crazy lady, Democrat Afton Bain, at 46. Small sample. Likely voters, though, which is good. Only 600 people surveyed, but my God.
That's a bit of an outlier, and even the Democrats don't have the race that close. But, I never predict special elections because the polling just can't capture who's going to turn out, right, on December 2nd. Not normally a time people are, hyped up to go vote. But the district is such that she'll fall short. And as I said, people will make up all sorts of rules. If she's within 5, it means this, 10 means this, whatever. She's going to do substantially better than Kamala Harris. And Republicans had to spend a lot of money in this race.
What if she wins?
It'll be by the standards of like special elections. It'll be an earthquake if she wins, because the level of overperformance will be so dramatic, and Republicans will have spent money. Right? You could say, well, we can fight this message by spending money. They spent a fortune to try to make sure they held the seat, and it makes Speaker Johnson's majority, virtually non-existent. So it'll be a massive deal if she wins, but I don't know anyone in the state who thinks she's going to.
I mean, if this is the standard, like my Strudwick is available. He's free. He's good looking.
Yeah.
He's starting to respond to commands, which the Democrats love.
Can he wink?
I don't this woman is not the answer.
Can he wink? Not everybody can wink.
No, but he can crap and eat it.
See, there's a metaphor there that surmounts and surpasses all other metaphors.
This could work in politics. Yeah. This is actually a useful skill for any lawmaker headed to Washington. Exactly. Mark Halperin, thank you.
Thank you, Megyn.
Thanks
Good
for helping
to see
me on
you.
this under the
Happy
weather
holidays.
day. Appreciate it. You too. All right, we will be back tomorrow. It's an NR day, and we look forward to seeing you then. Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. No drama in my voice today because I cannot use any of my normal intonations. Just hanging on. I've started a steroid and I have these trusty little watermelon drops, which are very tasty, I have to say. Ludens, if you're wondering. So bear with me because we actually do have a ton of real news breaking today. So honestly, I considered not coming yesterday. My voice is really starting to go. There's too much news. I have to be here, and I am here. And let's do this thing. Quite a turn of events regarding the Washington Post's big story on Friday that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth allegedly ordered military leaders to, quote, kill everybody after 2 people aboard an alleged drug boat survived the initial attack. Okay, now this is the Washington Post. It broke on Friday. That was its reporting. It set the country on fire for the past 5 days, with people repeating that story, accusing Pete Hegseth of war crimes, and has dominated print media, digital media, and everything online, everything on cable. The New York Times late last night reporting, citing 5 U.S. officials, that basically the Washington Post story was all wrong. That Secretary Hegseth's initial order did not, in fact, specify what should happen if survivors remained. And as White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt laid out yesterday, the second attack was ordered independently by Admiral Frank Bradley, goes by Mitch, I guess, in order to render the vessel destroyed and complete the mission. We pointed this out in the AM update this morning, and our first guest is going to walk us through it. There is a difference between a mission that is meant to destroy a boat that winds up simply damaging it on the first strike, and one that destroys it on the first strike, but nonetheless has 2 people floating in the water. If the boat has not been destroyed and it's merely damaged, that's an incomplete mission, whether there are survivors floating or not. The Times also dropping the bombshell that, per one of the officials they interviewed, the U.S. military actually intercepted radio communications from one of the survivors in the water to narco traffickers. Yet another reason why it might make sense for the mainstream media to just pump the brakes before they climb all over the terms war crimes and start talking about prosecuting people for murder. My first guest today already knows that lesson because he was one of the few online who was saying, hold on, over the past couple of days, that he did not see the evidence of any war crime. And after he read the Washington Post report, even though now we believe it was erroneous, but even as flawed as it was, he said there's reason in here to doubt what they're reporting, even from what they've said. And his name is Dr. Brian L. Cox. He spent 22 years in the U.S. Army. He's now an adjunct professor at Cornell Law School. His work focuses on international criminal law involving armed conflict. Brian has gone viral on X for his analysis on what happened in this strike, taking on the misleading reporting by the Washington Post and what he says are biased takes from anonymous military groups that are now getting re-cited by places like the Washington Post to shore up their initial reporting. These are anonymous people who are saying, here's what the law is. How do we rely on them for anything?
Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X.
There's a lot of politicians that should be getting coal in their stockings for Christmas, but Birch Gold thinks, as a smart planner, you deserve silver. That's why for every $5,000 you purchase between now and 12/22, Birch Gold will send you an ounce of silver, which is up over 60% this year. See, smart people diversify and have a hedge. That's why you should consider Birch Gold. With the rate cuts from the Fed in 2026, the dollar could be worth less. And what happens if the AI bubble bursts? Consider letting Birch Gold Group help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. And for every $5,000 you buy, you'll get an ounce of silver for you or your kids. Just text MK to 989898 to claim your eligibility for this offer. Text MK to the number 989898 because Birch Gold's free silver with qualifying purchase promotion ends on 12/22. Message and data rates may apply. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's really great to join you.
Okay, so you teach law and you have a background in the military. Did you practice law?
I did. So my first 15 years in the military was as a combat soldier, so airborne infantry soldier, and then combat camera, and then as an airborne infantry officer. So that was 15 years on the line, as we call it, in the military. And then the last 3 of that 15 years, I was in law school while I was in the National Guard. And then once I graduated, I came back from law school, came back on active duty as a judge advocate. And I spent the last 7 years as a military lawyer, so an Army judge advocate, including a deployment to Afghanistan, where I advised on international operational law.
Okay, so quite a bit. So you read this Washington Post report that hit on Friday, the headline of which is, hold on, Hegseth order on first Caribbean boat strike. Officials say, kill them all. Yeah. The subhead, as 2 men clung to a stricken, burning ship targeted by SEAL Team 6, the Joint Special Operations Commander followed the Defense Secretary's order to leave no survivors. Now we have the New York Times weighing in, saying basically that this was wrong, that there was one order by Pete Hegseth. It was before the mission and said, take out these boats. And there was no issue ordered saying kill them all. Right. But he wanted these boats destroyed. And that there was no subsequent communication between Pete Hegseth and the admiral who was on scene making the calls saying, kill those survivors who were clinging for life to this partially destroyed boat. That is not what happened, according to 5 sources in the New York Times. We'll see what the Washington Post does. But you, before you even knew about the New York Times reporting, were saying, there are enough holes in that WAPO report to drive a truck through. I do not trust this, and I actually don't think any war crime has been stated. Why?
So there's just so much speculation that's going on. So we don't know. It was 2 anonymous sources who were reporting, the quote from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. And we don't know for sure. Well, first of all, they're anonymous reports, anonymous sources. So there's that. But even the quote from the story, it's not clear whether this was a direct quote from Pete Hegseth saying "kill everybody," the way that it's worded in the Washington Post story, or whether the anonymous sources are basically paraphrasing what Secretary of War told to whoever the audience was. And so that was the first element that I'm concerned about. And then even if, let's say, it was directly before the mission and the Secretary of War directs whatever the commander is involved to kill everybody, that still isn't necessarily in order to take no prisoners, right? And so we are trained that if somebody is out of the fight due to sickness, illness, injury, or detention, in this case, shipwreck, that we don't continue the attack. And so if troops are given an order to kill everybody, you can reasonably interpret that to be kill all the enemy, attack the enemy. But at the same time, if you do end up encountering someone who is out of the fight, in this case due to shipwreck, then you don't attack them.
Exactly. So what the New York Times is reporting today, it hit last night, is that, again, 5 U.S. officials who spoke separately on the condition of anonymity said Mr. Hegseth, ahead of the September 2nd attack, ordered a strike that would kill the people on board the boat and destroy the vessel and its purported cargo of drugs, which would be a standard order. Yeah. I mean, you don't order these boats destroyed and not expect the people on board are going to die. You just take them out, take out the boat, take out the drug cargo on board. And that was it.
Exactly.
Not what the Washington Post reported, which was as these two survivors are clinging there, Pete Hegseth called up and said, take them out.
Right.
That's what the Washington Post went with. It's what NPR is going with still today, even in the wake of late night's New York Times drop.
Yeah, and it's just completely speculative. And, I understand the need to rely on anonymous sources at times when we're reporting, stories, especially when we're dealing with the government. But we still need to assess, we need to engage in a bit of media literacy and say, okay, well, these anonymous sources are saying that Pete Hegseth said this. And there's just so much, ambiguity there, which, ambiguity is fine. We're going to have that in reporting. But then to take that and run with it and essentially accuse the sitting Secretary of War of being a war criminal based on, this basically double hearsay that's being reported from anonymous sources is just, it doesn't make any rational sense.
Well, and on top of everything, so now you tell me, let's deal with what we believe is the reality here. Because WAPO suggested that Hegseth gave a spoken order, saying, kill them all, kill everyone who is still in that water. Now we believe that's not true, that the Washington Post had that wrong. But so let's deal with what we believe actually happened. Pete gave the okay for the mission, take out the boat, strike it, everybody on board is going to die, and take out the cargo. Then they dropped their first strike.
Right.
And the boat was, according to the administration's critics, they say it was destroyed. Excuse me, it was destroyed. And you have these two clinging to life. And the rules of law prohibit you from striking them. Now let's talk about the admiral, because the admiral, this guy Mitch, forgive me, can't find his last name in front of me. He did say, Bradley, let's have a second strike.
Right.
He is the one who said, we need a second strike. But that too is not a war crime, because you point out in your piece the difference between destroying a boat and damaging a boat.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So assuming that the boat itself originally is a military objective. So by definition, in the law of armed conflict, this is something that's by its nature, location, purpose, or use, in this case, purpose, makes an effective contribution to military action such that, capturing it or destroying it gives a definite military advantage, concrete direct military advantage under the circumstances ruling at the time. So that's the standard. That's what we apply in practice. That's what we're trained on. And so the boat, to begin with, assuming that law of armed conflict applies, and there's a lot of discussion about whether it should or shouldn't, and that's something we can get into. But for purposes of the operators who are involved in this strike, they are applying the law of armed conflict because they're told that they're in an armed conflict. So, this boat originally qualifies then as a military objective by definition that I just suggested, and it will no longer be a military objective if it is completely destroyed, right? So if under the circumstances no longer by its use makes an effective contribution. And even with the facts that the Washington Post reports in that initial story, there's an indication to me, at least when I read this, that the commander involved must have assessed that it's still qualified, to use the legal term, still qualified as a military objective, because he suggested that it could still radio for assistance, and another boat could come and capture, regain control of the cargo, and then continue mission. Almost said Charlie Mike, because that's what we call it in the military. Continue mission. And so if that's the case, then it's my impression from reading that is that the commander must have assessed that this boat still qualifies as a military objective such that it can still be attacked, which would also mean, incidentally, that the personnel that are on board are not shipwrecked, because, and if they were shipwrecked, let's call them hors de combat, so out of the fight due to the shipwreck. So we should not attack them in that case. But if the vessel that they're on still qualifies as a military objective, then they're not, but they're by definition, they're not shipwrecked. And, the commander could order subsequent strikes to finish the mission, to complete the mission, to ensure that the boat is no longer serviceable, that no longer is a military objective.
So if the boat is not destroyed and the mission is to destroy it, and you have two survivors who are floating on the boat or holding onto the boat in the water, it's fair game. They're going to go if the mission is take out that boat.
That's right. So, this is a difference between whether the boat was disabled or destroyed. And so, if it's destroyed, we can think of pieces of boat floating around in the water, and maybe survivors with a life vest on or clinging to it or whatever. Like, that's a destroyed boat. And if that's the case, then there would be no reason to reattack it. But if the boat is disabled, and again, by the initial report from the Washington Post, it's what it sounds to me like the commander involved assessed that the boat was disabled rather than destroyed, then it still qualifies then by legal definition, by the law of armed conflict, as a military objective, such that it can be it can be attacked until
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The mission is destroy it.
Yeah.
You've only disabled it,
Right.
so you need a second strike to destroy it. That's what this Admiral Bradley saw and did. And those two guys who survived the initial blast were taken down in the second strike. And now, not only did we have the suggestion that it's possible the two survivors might have been able to coordinate with other narco-terrorists, we actually, in the New York Times report, this is on the record now. One of the officials that spoke to the Times is quoted as saying the U.S. military intercepted radio communications from one of the survivors to what the official said were narco traffickers.
Right.
I mean, now that's as clear cut as it comes. Any military commander would order those guys taken out.
Absolutely, because at that point, if that's the intelligence that they have, at that point it absolutely still does qualify. Because again, by definition, an object that by its use makes an effective contribution to military action. And so, it was kind of implied by the way that the Washington Post reported it that the commander believed that they could radio for assistance and have someone come and get the cargo and continue with the mission. But with with going on record now, establishing on the record that yes, there was in fact a radio transmission that was intercepted, then that basically supports the conclusion that that's exactly what the commander believed at the time, and the commander ordered subsequent strikes to destroy the boat because it wasn't destroyed to begin with.
This is so amazing to me. This all makes perfect sense. It's a left-wing Trump-hating narrative that we have these military commanders who are just these rogue agents who have thrown caution to the wind, who are just out there for bloodlust, trying to take down anybody that they see in the seas, as opposed to rational, thoughtful, considered leaders who understand the rules of military combat a lot better than the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Or some armchair pundits who want to jump all over them. And it also seemed clear in the way the military was very careful in its wording about this. You had Trump saying, Hegseth told me he did not give that second order, that he did not give a verbal command to kill all the people. And they're still denying that. And then Hegseth sent out a tweet saying, I stand behind Admiral Bradley. He's done nothing wrong, which seemed to be a way of saying, here's the guy who gave the order, but he did nothing wrong. It was a way of sort of clarifying it wasn't me, and now we know it wasn't him. But we also want to find out whether Admiral Bradley did anything wrong, and the answer is no. He had a partially destroyed ship from which, according to this one official to the Times, the radio comms were still possible, and one of the survivors was using them to call in backup.
Exactly. Yeah, and so this is the danger with running with completely speculative reporting. And initial reports are almost always, and this is something we know in the military, for operationally, we just take it as a given. Initial reports are almost always, if not wrong, they're at least incomplete enough that you don't have enough information to make, really meaningful conclusions. We still need to gather information. We still need to figure out exactly what happened. And so the responsible thing, if the Washington Post wanted to report, based on the sources that they have, that's a journalistic decision in-house. And, I know that there are checks in place to decide, whether we're going to run a story based on completely anonymous sources. So that's one thing to run this story. There is news value and public interest in it. I get it. But we need to exercise caution when all we're dealing with is speculative reports from anonymous sources that we're not really sure, like they're filling in, they're providing some evidence of what happened, but they're not really filling in the gaps. And before we can make conclusions and denounce everybody involved as a war criminal, I mean, this is, if they're wrong about this, if they're wrong about the allegations, this is defamation, right? So before we...
it's pretty mighty slander.
Right. So before we jump to conclusions like this, it makes logical sense to gather the information, figure out, now, if it came to light that the commander involved or the Secretary of War, for this case, saw that the boat was completely destroyed and there was no military utility in attacking the boat anyways, and there's just 2 survivors clinging around to wreckage floating around in the Caribbean Ocean, and they said killed him anyways. I mean, if that's the evidence that we're getting, then, I mean, that sounds to me like a war crime, right? But we're not getting that evidence from the initial Washington Post report. And so it's irresponsible to make conclusions, really assertive conclusions that this was a war crime and that Pete Hegseth needs to resign or be fired or prosecuted or whatever, based on incomplete information.
You had Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts out there saying, you mark my words, someone's going to jail for murder.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like so irresponsible, ginning up hatred and acrimony toward our serving military members who are under enough stress as it is. You made a point in your tweet storm that was so powerful, responding to those who say, in defense of this so-called seditious 6, the 6 lawmakers who went out there and started this whole thing by saying, hey, soldiers, don't obey illegal orders. People say, you know what? It's just a reminder to these soldiers in these tumultuous times, like you don't have the obligation to follow an illegal order, and they just needed that. What you had a response to that? Tell us what it is.
Yeah, we don't need to be. Having spent 22 years in the military, I'm just still kind of part of my identity, and so I still identify in that, even though I'm no longer in. But service members, me included, when I was in, we don't need reminders that we have to. We have an obligation not to obey manifestly unlawful orders, right? So not just unlawful orders, but manifestly. We don't need anyone from Congress. We don't need anyone from the outside to remind us of this because, I mean, it's part of the ethos that we live every day. It's drilled into us, starting in basic training, and it's part of our following orders. It's part of the military life. I mean, it's part of good order and discipline. But we already understand that we have no obligation to follow manifestly unlawful orders. And so the people who are reminding us or reminding the members of the DoD of this, they know that service members don't need to be reminded that we have no obligation to follow manifestly unlawful orders. They're doing this to create doubt, to second guess the current political leadership of the military, civilian and senior military leadership, to create the appearance that the orders that are being given are manifestly unlawful, and so there is an obligation not to follow them. And that is also irresponsible because, again, it's not something we need to be reminded of, and the obligation is not just to not follow or not obey unlawful orders, but it's manifestly unlawful. And if we don't and so the context of the members of Congress who are being referred to as the seditious 6, they're making their case that this is not an armed conflict, that it should actually be human rights law that's applying, and we should not be engaged in military strikes against these boats. And that's an opinion, and that's it's interesting academically. But the troops who are involved in this conflict are not specialists in international law involving the resort to force, and so that's at the political leadership level. And so we are given orders. We have determined, the political leadership has determined that you are in an armed conflict, so apply law of armed conflict to this rather than human rights law. And that is we're not in a position to understand whether that is unlawful or not. We are going to comply with law of armed conflict.
This is pretty sophisticated stuff that had to be run up and down the chain of command and lawyers, DOJ and elsewhere. Like, to expect Admiral Bradley to have full, complete knowledge of this, whereas people who have gone to law school, who have practiced law at the elite levels, who understand military law, maritime law, all the things. They had to study this. They had teams who studied it. To expect one admiral to have it all down, as opposed to understanding that I have a boss who has to deal with that. He talks to lawyers who've had to deal with that. And when my boss tells me what to do, I do it.
That's right.
Like, that's how the chain of command works. But the notion that Senator Mark Kelly can somehow empower, the guy who actually has to press the button on the kinetic strike to say, no, Admiral, I'm not doing that, sir. Mark Kelly told me I have the authority to say no to you, is really dangerous.
It is. So it's dangerous at the individual level, because if that troop, whoever it is, that service member refuses to obey the order, and it doesn't turn out that it's reasonably manifestly unlawful, then that whoever it is, that service member, is going to be court-martialed. And that service member, it's not going to be a defense that, well, I read on social media that Senator Mark Kelly said that I have an obligation not to do this, and so I didn't do it, right? So that's not a defense. Right. And so that service member is now at legal risk for having the impression that he or she does not need to follow this order when it actually is a lawful order. And so these external commentators are essentially trying to substitute their own understanding of what is or is not lawful for the actual current chain of command from the Secretary of War all the way down to the tactical level. So that's one issue for the individual, concerned, is that's not going to be a defense when they get court-martialed for this. But then there's a more kind of systemic concern with this, and that is it's sowing the seeds of doubt among those who are actually involved with carrying out orders. And if there is hesitation in carrying out lawful orders, then that's the whole reason why we train on this. We train on the disciplined use of overwhelming force. If we're not doing that because we're second guessing orders that are actually lawful, we're going to end up having hesitation on the battlefield, and that's going to end up creating missed opportunities that could end up costing us our lives when the missed opportunity of the adversary that we didn't attack ends up attacking us, and that could end up creating a risk of mission failure.
Wow, it's just so irresponsible. Brian Cox, thank you so much for your analysis. Love talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. All right, take care.
Thank you for your service. Okay, coming up next, Rich and Charlie have been watching this. They're with National Review. We are having National Review Day, and we start that in 2 minutes. We talk a lot about personal responsibility on this show. Well, here's one aspect that's really important: your health. And I'm not talking about following whatever the experts recommend. I'm talking about real, data-driven decisions based on your body's actual numbers. We demand transparency in government, but most of us have no idea what's happening inside of our own bodies, never mind inside of D.C. Disease can develop silently for years before symptoms appear. By then, you're playing catch-up with expensive treatments instead of preventing problems when they're cheap and easy to fix. Well, I want to tell you about Gevity. They are revolutionizing preventative care with something radically different: 100-plus blood markers tested at your home. Personalized supplement packs shipped directly to you based on your deficiencies. Biannual retesting to track progress, plus ongoing virtual consultations on your schedule. This is healthcare independence, and you get 20% off at gogevity.com/Megyn with code Megyn when you check out. That's gogeviti.com/Megyn, because no one should control your health decisions but you. Let's get to the rest of the news with our next guest. It's an NR day here at the MK Show. Rich Lowry, editor-in-chief of National Review, and Charles C.W. Cook, senior writer for National Review and host of the Charles C.W. Cook podcast. Find all their work by becoming an NR Plus subscriber. Highly recommend. Guys, great to see you.
Good to see you. Not so great to hear you. As I texted you earlier, you sound worse than yesterday.
Yeah. I know. I saved up all my roid rage for you, Rich Lowry. All right. So I understand you heard at least part of Brian Cox, who's a very thoughtful guy, and what his initial reaction to that Washington Post report is already being borne out by the subsequent reporting by the New York Times. He saw the Washington Post talking about a disabled boat as opposed to a destroyed boat, and understood, as a guy who served for 22 years, wait, that makes a difference. If the mission is to destroy a boat, and after strike one, it's only been disabled, you can pretty much bet your dollars to donuts there's going to be a strike two. That's a mission not accomplished. And so the second strike would have been perfectly within the laws of war, with or without two survivors clinging to some portion of the boat. But on top of all that, we get the New York Times now reporting that at least one of the officials they spoke to reports that one of these alleged survivors, or whatever you want to call them, had radioed back, was actually radioing back to another narco-terrorist saying, like, help, the boat has been disabled, and giving, the people in command, like Admiral Bradley, even more reason to take the second strike. And we also now learn, contrary to the Washington Post report, that Pete Hegseth did not issue a second order. There was no verbal command to kill everybody, as WAPO reported. So, Rich, there was a litany of things wrong as it looks today from that Washington Post report, which is diametrically opposed to the New York Times and to what the White House and the Pentagon are saying.
Yeah, so just as someone who spent a lot of time consuming news my adult life, just the Washington Post story has the classic aspect of something that's too perfect, that's too cinematic. It feels like the movie where you have the handsome, slightly nefarious defense secretary with all the screens on the wall, and there's the moment where you can see whether you can take out the wounded guys, and he orders it. So I just inherently, we need to learn more, but the New York Times story seems more credible to me. Where I depart from our guest, I guess, is that what he says makes total sense to me. If this is a destroyer or some sort of military vessel, of course you take it out, even if there are wounded people on the vessel. But I just don't think these drug runners are combatants. I don't think they represent a threat to our military. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't take the guys off the boat and then sink the boat or whatever you want to do. So I have a problem over and beyond the double tap. I don't think we should be tapping these boats to begin with because they're not combatants.
Okay, but they've gotten a legal blessing for doing that. And so now the question is tactics and whether they're within the rules of war. And it looks like the Washington Post got way ahead of its skis on this one, Charles. And I'll tell you something else that's interesting here. This morning you had NPR, and I believe, I don't know what NPR tapes, excuse me, it's Up First podcast. But I think it's either very, very late at night or first thing in the morning, because I'm always comparing my own AM update to theirs just to see if they have what we have, because we always go very, very late on our taping. Anyway, they completely ignore the New York Times reporting, which is not like NPR. So I think they either missed it or worse, they just didn't account for it in doubling down on the what appears to be faulty Washington Post reporting from Friday. Take a listen to what I heard on NPR this morning.
So on Friday, the Washington Post reported that on September 2nd, U.S. forces struck one of those boats, leaving survivors afterwards. And so Hegseth gave an order to kill those survivors. Now, NPR later confirmed that Hegseth had ordered both strikes. All of that matters because, as Congress members from both parties have said, that second strike may have constituted a war crime. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense in that Washington Post story said that, quote, this entire narrative is completely false.
Now, what did we learn from the White House yesterday?
Well, the administration then confirmed some parts of this story. At yesterday's press briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt acknowledged a second strike. But as for Hegseth ordering it, she didn't deny it, but said Hegseth authorized U.S. Navy Admiral Frank M. Bradley to take these actions. But our NPR colleague Tom Bowman has new reporting on this. Yesterday, a U.S. official who was not authorized to speak publicly pushed back on the White House, saying Hegseth gave the command for 2 strikes to kill, in addition to 2 strikes to sink the boat.
Okay, so it's like the New York Times report doesn't exist. She doesn't acknowledge Caroline Leavitt did say yesterday that Hegseth did not say kill everyone. She did not acknowledge, she just went with that he gave the order to kill, and that NPR confirmed that he gave this order to kill, like a second order. And she did not acknowledge the Hegseth tweet yesterday saying Admiral Bradley is the one who did it, and we stand behind him. He basically said, Admiral Bradley commanded the operation. He did nothing wrong. We stand behind him 100%. So, like, none of this is in NPR, which I will confess is shocking to me. Your thoughts?
Well, that part's not shocking to me. I was skeptical of the Washington Post story. That doesn't mean it's untrue, but I have been and remain skeptical of it, having lived through now 10 years of stories relating to Donald Trump. the way in which the anonymous sources were used as scaffolding to build what, as Rich said, looks a bit like a movie scene made me skeptical. And then when the New York Times story came out, which is against the interests of the New York Times' editorial bent, I became even more skeptical. So I'm absolutely open to the idea the Washington Post got this wrong or went too far with what information it had. And I think your guest made a compelling case to that effect. But I am with Rich on the underlying problem, which is that there's no authorization here for war in the first place. Now, that is a separate issue. It certainly would not mean that Pete Hegseth or others were engaged in war crimes or any of that. But I do think that that matters as a backdrop just as much as the details of this particular strike.
It does matter. I agree with you that it matters. Before I move off of this, and to that, I want to point this out. John Podhoretz, he's not a fan of Pete Hegseth, I think it's fair to say, of Commentary Magazine. He tweeted out, if this New York Times story is true, the Washington Post story is a genuinely vile slander of both Hegseth and Bradley. And he's seeing it too. So this is a major conflict between, the New York Times on the one hand, NPR and Washington Post on the other hand, and we'll see how it gets resolved. But resolve it should, because you've got military service personnel twisting in the wind. And the whole thing is so wrong. This is all started by Mark Kelly. He has this aw shucks, like, gee, I'm just being neighborly here, letting the soldiers know that they shouldn't obey these terrible orders, which inevitably, the evil Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth are giving. It's like, I'm just Joe Friendly trying to remind you of this. But that's what set this whole thing off. Here that is. This is actually from Meet the Press on Sunday, SOT0.
You can certainly go to the judge, advocate generals, the lawyers, and have a discussion about it. If you don't have time, you just say simply, I'm not going to do that. That's against the law.
It puts a lot of burden on the troops to make a decision in real time.
It puts a tremendous amount of burden on officers in the military, but that is their responsibility. And they can figure out, a reasonable person can tell something that is legal and something that is illegal.
So would you refuse these specific orders to strike drug boats if you were still in uniform?
Well, the difference between the initial strike and what is being reported, as a second strike, and those things are different. I think this administration has tied themselves in knots, the explanations that we have received on how this is all legal. And I was saying weeks ago, my concern is with the service members, that we're gonna put these individuals in a really, really tough decision, in a tough place. And they may find out, down the road that they did something that is illegal. It is not fair to them.
Wait, I thought he just said that he said in the middle of that soundbite, what's a legal order and what's an illegal order. Then he ends it with, I'm really concerned about the service members who might not know, and then down the line are going to get prosecuted. The whole argument is circular. It falls apart upon just, easy scrutiny, Rich Lowry. And that's because he's not doing protect the troops. He's doing politics.
Well, I thought it was notable in that interview. He was pressed a couple times on that point. Would you have defied the second order? And he was very hesitant. He never said, yeah, I would have defied it. Instead, went to those generalities. Look, on this video, it was clearly base maintenance. The audience for that is the left-wing base of the Democratic Party. Everyone who's in the military, all this stuff is drilled into them constantly. They don't need Mark Kelly's permission to defy illegal orders. And I'm highly skeptical on the other side of the ledger that any Marine, a 19-year-old Marine, is going to defy a lawful order because of something Mark Kelly said. So I find this aspect of it to be just entirely theater.
Here's the other thing, Rich, to your point about the Washington Post theatrical reporting. It was co-authored by Ellen Nakashima. Does that ring a bell? At WAPO. She's been square in the crosshairs of our friend Glenn Greenwald for many years, who has kept the receipts on the Russiagate fake reporting. And she was almost as bad as Natasha Berstrand, who's also all over this story. Two of the chief antagonists of Trump 1.0 are back in Trump 2.0. And now here's Ellen Nakashima, who won a Pulitzer in 2018 for her fake Russiagate reporting that said that Russia was trying to help Trump win the White House. again, now we're looking at all these CIA documents and understanding that they were manipulated by John Brennan and so on. She had no skepticism at all because it made Trump look bad the first time around. And I would argue exactly the same thing is haunting her reporting. She's now been humiliated, not by Fox News, not by me, not by NR, but by the New York Times. And they need to update that reporting stat. Okay, let's keep going. Now, today, I want to tell you that we have our own exclusive reporting in response to the hit that came out yesterday, this report attacking Kash Patel and to a lesser extent, Dan Bongino. We broke some of this news on our AM update, but I have more to tell you today. That is direct from Kash Patel himself with his authorization that it be on the record. By way of background, what happened was a group called the National Alliance of Retired and Active Duty FBI Special Agents and Analysts issued a report. This report, we're told, is going to be presented to Congress later this week. It's called a pulse check of the first 6 months of the Patel leadership, February through August. And it calls the FBI a chronically underperforming agency, in part because of Kash's political partisanship. It reveals a troubling picture, they say. This is after their interviews with rank and file, current and former agents, of a chronically underperforming agency debilitated by low confidence in FBI leadership, based on a lack of prior experience, a historically toxic culture of fear and operational paralysis, and deep-seated internal partisanship. They go on, and I'll go through some of the allegations. But the biggest thing that they point to that's been used to embarrass or try to Kash Patel is a story that when Kash went out to the Charlie Kirk assassination guys, that he showed up there via his airplane, and he didn't have an FBI jacket, and that he, like a high school girl wanting to be in the right outfit at the big football game, refused to leave the vehicle, the plane, until he got the proper threads on him. He wouldn't leave until he got an FBI jacket, and that on top of that, he demanded a patch to make him look like badass. So that one of the local guys had to take off a patch and give him the patch so that he looked tougher. That's the implication. Well, I've spoken with Kash Patel, and he said none of that is true. His initial denials and the real facts about where the FBI is, they call it rudderless. The FBI is actually truly setting records on its arrest rates, on violent crimes, gangs, and so on. But it's all an AM update. But on this particular incident, which was meant to personally humiliate him, obviously, he says it's not true. He says he flew from New York directly out to Utah. He had no proper clothing. He was out to dinner when he learned about Charlie. So he did borrow an FBI jacket. He said the patches piece of the story is also not true. He said a guy who worked one of the special divisions out in Utah actually gave him a patch as like a solidarity, the way a lot of law enforcement will give you like a coin or whatever. He gave it to him because he wanted the FBI director to feel like part of the crew. And Patch, to respect this guy and say thanks for, giving this to me, put it on his arm and got off the plane. He said there was no waiting on the plane to get a jacket. There was no waiting on the plane to get a patch. He said we ran off the plane. We understood Charlie had been murdered. It was a tumultuous time. And that just none of this is true. And I got to tell you guys something. When I went through yesterday, because Miranda Devine had an explosive report yesterday. She, as always, is a great reporter. But then later, the actual 110 or some odd page report dropped. And as I actually went through it, the complaints in here, boys. I mean, okay, I'll give you an example. The deep-seated internal partisanship is there because because of the FBI director who previously campaigned for the president as a vocal critic of the FBI. Too fucking bad. Also left-leaning factions embedded who have TDS. I accept that. There is increasing dislike for Trump in the FBI, they say. The number of FBI employees exhibiting TDS is much more widespread than it was within the FBI. Then they go on to say, agents are upset about the January 6th pardons. A subsource, who's an FBI employee, reported he or she is demoralized that the president pardoned those rightfully convicted for their role in January 6th. Well, take it up with Oprah. Why is that why does Kash Patel have to run around talking to like an individual? This is a one-person complaint from the sound of it. They go on to say, Patel is allegedly paralyzed. FBI personnel, predominantly those members of FBI management, are afraid of losing their jobs. They are making operational decisions based on that fear. Some FBI managers are waiting for the FBI director to tell them specifically what to do. And they're not doing anything because they're waiting on those directions. This reads like a struggle session that you would have it like a self-help weekend away. And the conclusion of these guys in this report is you better listen to Kash Patel. Every opinion matters. You have to reprogram the mindset from hyper defensive to full receive mode and commit to embracing feedback. And then you must execute on the recommendations. This sounds like a BLM session. Like the Wall Street Journal kids who tried to pull this shit onto the WSJ during the George Floyd-a-palooza. And WSJ said, yeah, we hear you. We understand your feelings. Get out if you don't want to work here. It's a news organization. Rich, I'm sorry, but this is like, I'm not persuaded. And this is not just because I like Kash and Dan. I was perfectly ready to criticize them. This sounds like bullshit.
Yeah, so the jacket story, classic kind of BS story. And it goes back to the Hegseth Washington Post story. I learned long ago in the Trump era, you don't believe anything that allegedly happened in private or that was said in private. I mean, they lied about things Trump said on camera in the Lester Holt interview about why he fired James Comey, what he said about the Charlottesville protests. So I don't believe anything that's reported about something that happened in private, unless there's some written record of it. And this is a classic story that feels like the jacket thing. It's just made up. It's hearsay, repeated 2 or 3 times by people who hate the guy and want to embarrass him. So I put no credibility in that whatsoever, and his denial sounds totally credible. Now, look, this is a huge institutional and organizational lift for him. He's never had a job like this. I'm sure things have been shaky because he's inexperienced. We saw some of that in public and how he handled the Charlie Kirk assassination, saying whether we had a suspect in custody or not and having to change a couple times on that. But on the other hand, there's an entrenched bureaucracy that's going to be hostile to his priorities and hostile to his politics. So this is not. I don't take any of this very very seriously, but it comes with the job for Kash.
Yeah, well, exactly. And Miranda's a straight reporter, but the question is, what's in the ingredients of the report that she was basing her report on? And here's the thing: he raised with me, Charlie Kash did. The FBI is doing a good job. They allege it's rudderless, directionless, people are paralyzed. These are some of the stats we listed in AM Update today. Under Kash's leadership, the Bureau has made almost 30,000 arrests this year. That's a 100% increase from 2024, 25,000 of those for violent crimes. Over 100 MS-13 gang members, over 200 plus Trenda Aragua members. 6,000 missing children have been found. That's a 22% increase over last year. 1,700 child predators have been arrested, up 10% over last year. Human trafficking arrests, up 15% from last year. Domestic terrorism arrests, up 30%. 1,900 kilos of fentanyl have been seized. 4 of the top 10 most wanted criminals have been nabbed. That's the same number President Biden's FBI nabbed in 4 years sitting in office. So to me, this just smacks of they don't like him. They don't like Dan. The FBI, I'm talking about the FBI rank and file. And that hasn't changed just because they got rid of DEI, et cetera.
So I'm very far from being an expert in the internal workings of the FBI. I'm also not a great fan of the FBI. What I do know, though, is how the US Constitution works. And all of the criticisms that you read are irrelevant under our system of government. I am also a critic of the January 6th pardons. But Donald Trump is the duly elected president of the United States. He's the head of the executive branch. And if you cannot, as an FBI agent or any other agent of the federal government, work for the president, then you have to resign. Likewise, Donald Trump chose Kash Patel to be in that role as the head of that agency. If you don't like him, then you have to leave. If you look back to the beginning of this republic, the idea that people would stay on between presidencies was absurd. Now, over time, we've developed this professional bureaucracy. There are good sides to that. There are bad sides to that. But the deal is that as a government employee, you work for the president until you can't. So if you've been in the FBI or any other agency in the last 15 years, you've worked under Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and now Donald Trump again. Those are very different people. They've done very different things. Half the country likes one of those guys. The other half does not. So I think unless there is a lot more to the report, I think the answer to that is nobody cares. The notion that the military in particular, but police forces ought to be subordinate to the civil power is one of the core elements in America. So, I don't know if you need to go see Oprah, but if you're upset with your leadership, then suck it up, because that is how our democracy works, and you wouldn't want it any other way.
It's very strange, Rich, to read this from a FBI agents. Like you have to receive the information. You have to do something about it. Make them feel seen and heard. Oh my God! I mean, like if I heard this from my staff, I'd be like, "You need to go work for somebody else." I'm not the make you feel seen and heard kind of person.
Yeah, you want the FBI guys to be guys with crew cuts that take orders and go take down bad guys and don't spend their time backbiting and whining, which is what this report sounds like.
Well, exactly. So in any event, I think what I'm seeing with Kash and with Dan is a trend to try to diminish and embarrass them. And I know their critics will say that's because they've done diminishing and embarrassing things. And I would just urge people to understand, I've been in this business a long time. I'm seeing a pattern on them, same pattern as we've seen on Hegseth, where the people who didn't like them to begin with continue not to like them. And then more and more and more hit pieces wind up in the news. In fact, we just saw this. This is before we go to break, I'm just going to read this. I know. This is from, here it is, Eric Schmidt, who's now a U.S. Senator from Missouri. He says a quick note on Hegseth. He was and is a threat to permanent Washington status quo. They didn't defeat the nomination. They tried hard. I saw all the behind-the-scenes craziness. He was their top target. Since then, there have been countless anonymous leaks meant to undermine him and thwart Trump and others. Bogus story after bogus story. It's the same tired playbook. Same for him, same for Kash, same for Dan. We'll be right back. When you are buried in credit card and loan debt, it's human nature to put it off and say, I'm going to deal with that later. If that's you, here's something you need to know. Done With Debt discovered a little-known strategy that works in your favor to dramatically reduce or even erase your debt altogether. They can aggressively engage everyone you owe money to this fall. And here's why. They know which lenders and credit card companies are doing year-end accounting and need to cut deals. They even know which ones have year-end audits and need to get your debt off of their books. So consider getting started with Done With Debt now, this fall. Done With Debt accomplishes this without bankruptcy or new loans. In fact, most clients end up with more money in their pocket the first month. Get started now while you still have time. Go to donewithdebt.com and speak with one of their specialists for free. Donewithdebt.com. Guys, this just in, as Trump is holding a cabinet meeting, some good news. We don't know how good, but it's definitely good news about the remaining survivor National Guard member who was shot by that Afghani asylee. He'd been granted asylum in April. You remember there was a young woman, she passed, and then there was a young man who's 24, and Trump just said this. Listen.
And I want to pay my deepest respects to those two incredible people from the National Guard. In West Virginia they came from. I spoke to their parents. Sarah is gone. She passed away. She's looking down on us now, and she loves her parents, and they loved her. They were, somebody said, how are they doing? I said, the word is devastated. Doing. How are they going to do? They're devastated. The rest of their lives they're going to be devastated. She was an incredible person, highly respected, top of her class, everything. She was like a perfect human being. 20 years old, just started. She was like a baby. She was so proud. They were giving her a promotion, and she told the parents that she was getting a promotion, and they were so proud of her. Then they get a call that this happened. And we have one young man who's fighting for his life. He's fighting very hard. I think he's probably doing better than anybody. They said he he didn't have a chance. I'll tell you, the one who said he's going to live is his mother. Spoke to his mother. Sir, he's going to live.
I pray to God that's true. His name is Andrew Wolf. Sarah Beckstrom is the National Guard member who died on Thanksgiving, age 20. And what's been so disgusting in the wake of this murder and attempted murder in the case of Andrew, Charles, is the left wing running around trying to pretend that the issue is really that they were there in the first place, like Jane Mayer of The New Yorker out there saying this was all so unnecessary. They didn't need to be there, as if that's really the problem. Like, not that there's some lunatic who drove from Washington State to Washington, D.C. to shoot down two innocents in the prime of their lives, but that Trump gave the order to fortify the crime preventions in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous. They make it sound as if the United States staged an unprovoked invasion of, say, Australia, and then these two young people were shot, at which point you would say, well, why were they there? But that's not what happened. The District of Columbia is a federal district. It is under federal control. It's not a state. It's not a foreign country. The federal government is allowed to deploy federal agents in the federal district. So once you get past that, then what Jane Mayer and others effectively are saying is the equivalent of saying, well, if you don't like the police, you can just shoot them. Which is crazy. Of course you can't. This is the fundamental presumption beneath our civilization, that we do not kill people just because we have a problem with them. Now, we don't know precisely what the person who shot them was trying to achieve, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether he was upset that they were there. It doesn't matter whether he was trying to commit some secondary crime. It doesn't matter whether he had political or religious objections. It doesn't matter whether he equated them in some way with ICE or other federal agents. Perhaps he was upset about taxes. That doesn't give him the right to kill IRS agents. You cannot do this. It is not just stupid to say, well, of course, if they hadn't been there, they wouldn't have been shot, because someone else would have been, the police. It is evil. That is not how it works in the United States. But I think, unfortunately, it is representative of a particular sort of progressive thinking, which holds that if, for whatever reason, you, being the progressive elite, don't like someone, whether that be the deployment of the National Guard in DC, or ICE performing and enforcing immigration law, or, say, Charlie Kirk saying things they didn't like, then it's sort of understandable. They wouldn't go so far as to say it's justified, but it's sort of understandable, and you have to take that into consideration when looking at the story. And Ken Delaney on MS Now, which is formerly MSNBC.
Oh, I have it.
He said, well, you want to play it? Because he essentially said this.
Let me play it. Let me play it. Here it is. Sat 11.
But of course, you know, there's so much controversy happening in the United States right now with ICE, who are also wearing uniforms and wearing masks. And so there's, you don't know, people walking around with uniforms in an American city. There are some Americans that might object to that. And so apparently this shooting has happened.
There are some Americans who might object to that, and so apparently this shooting has happened because people walking around with uniforms, people might object to it, Charlie.
Well, so how dare he say that? How dare he say that? As I say, he's not going to come out and say it was justified or they came close. He's going to hint at it. There are all manner of things that I object to, Megyn. I don't like the federal income tax. I don't like Obamacare. I don't like some of our gun control laws. There's no way Ken Delaney will go on TV and say, well, of course, the president just signed an increase in the tax rate so that an IRS agent was killed, you know, so that happened. There's no way he would say that the HHS
what about abortion?
department...
Planned Parenthood.
Right, that's another one for 50 years. Now, of course, there were a few people, a handful on the fringes during the Roe v. Wade era who did target abortion doctors. But do you know what people at National Review said? They said, don't do that, that's murder. Don't do that. That is a fundamental break in the social contract. So this is a crazy
and Ken
approach.
wasn't out there saying, well, yeah, abortions make a lot of people upset.
Right.
You know, he wasn't saying that.
Right.
It only works one way, Rich, and it's obvious. And it's like, to me, the difference is between, as a lawyer, cause and fact and proximate cause. You know, if I get into a car accident, God forbid, and hurt somebody, am I the proximate cause of that accident? Maybe I am. Is my mom the cause, in fact, of that accident? In a way, if you want to go back that far, she gave birth to me. Like so, yeah, President Trump, like also the parents of those two poor National Guardsmen. Yeah, they're to blame. They didn't stop them from joining the National Guard. Trump is to blame. He deployed the National Guard. Maybe their coffee maker was to blame because had it not worked that morning, they would have been 5 minutes late. It's like you don't spend time in the cause and fact place. When you're a news person, you talk about the proximate cause of what led to this terrible thing. And by anyone's measure, there is one person and one person alone to blame for this. And it's this Afghani guy we brought back here after we pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021.
Yeah. And the idea that wearing uniforms is a provocation. All sorts of people wear uniforms, right? You know who else wears uniforms? Cops. Cops are ambushed. Several years ago under de Blasio, there's a cop sitting in his car in Queens and was shot in the head. Are we supposed to say, oh, he should have parked there? Or he shouldn't have been in the car? Or those Dallas officers in that awful ambush that, 15, 12 something, shot, a number of them killed. Was it their fault? Should they have not been there? Some people don't like police. Maybe it was their fault. So this is hideous stuff. And maybe one effect from this will be that it actually humanizes the National Guard members. They aren't going to these cities cracking heads. They're not some alien force. They're, by and large, young people, upstanding, patriotic, want to do their duty. And what they're doing largely in Washington, D.C. is providing a symbol of public order. That in no way justifies any act of violence against them, any harassment against them, and of course, in no way justifies murdering them.
So what do we make of this guy? Because I realize a lot of people went to the fact of he was unvetted. There are too many who were let in after the withdrawal who were unvetted. And there were. That's true. But it does not appear that this guy was necessarily one of them, because he went through a lot of vetting. And my next guest coming on after you guys is going to walk us through some of that. But even the administration is suggesting they think the guy was radicalized here. Which is like, oh, jeez, like, great, Rich. What do we do with that? So he got here and life was so miserable for him, or he had some sort of a break. I don't know. Now we're getting all the articles about how sad he was. I don't really care. Who gives a shit how sad he was? He was a sad terrorist who yelled Allahu Akbar as he took Sarah Beckstrom's life. Boo fucking who? But it is interesting if he got radicalized here, because he was a few years earlier helping us and then was yelling Allahu Akbar as he shot two of our service personnel. Yeah.
So it's very hard to see how you filter out for this, right? If he either had a mental break or he was radicalized once he was here, or a combination of those two, it's very hard to vet for that. And my take, we talked about this before, is we just need fewer numbers. You make fewer mistakes if you're letting fewer people in the first place, and we should be very cautious about people from alien cultures. I think there should always be a humanitarian element to our immigration policy, but refugees from, maybe we'll talk a little bit about Minnesota too, from Somalia are going to have a hard time assimilating. It's a totally different culture. Somalia doesn't have anything to do with us. There's no reason we should be giving asylum to those people, or that if they're refugees, they shouldn't be going someplace nearby Somalia where they might speak the language, where the culture is familiar. Yes. And it would be easier for them to go back. That's supposed to be part of the process. You hope refugees eventually return to their native country, and it'd be much easier for a Minneapolis to assimilate the Somali immigrants if, say, there were 10,000 rather than 80,000. So I don't think there's an easy answer to this guy's case. At least it doesn't look like there was. You'd hope when we're granting asylum, by the way, that it's not just, do you have a fear of persecution back home, which he certainly did. But whether you're sane or not, and an upstanding member of the community or not, and with the Trump administration kicking the tires now in the asylum process, you hope that's something they're looking at.
Well, there was this group that was monitoring him, Charlie, this like immigration, I don't know what it's called. It's got some long official sounding name, but it wasn't really a governmental organization. It was a left-leaning organization that realized he was suicidal. And as far as I can tell, told no one. Did not, it's problematic because to the points that Rich was just making, you bring these people who have a totally different background, totally different upbringing, who, let's face it, grow up in a place where the jihad is very frequent, common, familiar, and not nearly as frowned upon as it is here. And then you unleash them in the United States, even when they were so-called good guys, with only a left-leaning bleeding heart, like checking in on them every once in a while. And are we totally shocked that this is what happened?
Well, also, although of course it is not the case that most people who come here from Islamic countries are radicalized, they are more likely to be radicalized than, say, me. Because they come from a background in which the messages they're receiving are normal. If somebody came up to me and started talking about radical Islam, I think I would look at them funny. Also,
you're radicalized on some things, Charlie, just in a good way.
That's true. I'm radicalized on the American experiment.
On the government repayment of students' debt.
That's
Kamala
right.
Harris.
But I managed to avoid killing anyone in the process. I just wrote very furiously at my keyboard in the grand tradition of American rebels. But look, it's more difficult to vet people from Afghanistan than it is people from England or Japan or Australia. And that's another thing we have to bear in mind. He may have been vetted, but the information that the federal government was able to look at when I applied to become a permanent resident and then a citizen was comprehensive, because I came from a stable country in which the bureaucracy and the government have long been fairly competent. And that is true of people from France or from Germany or from Australia or Japan or what you will. It's just not the case for people from the third world. There aren't many records in failed Islamic states such as Afghanistan. And that is, when we hear the word vetted, that's something we ought to bear in mind. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you don't let anyone in from anywhere that isn't a Western country. But it does mean you have to have a different approach, because you just can't know the paper trail in an Afghanistan, as opposed to, say, a Germany, is worthwhile.
By the way, the name of the group that was supposed to be keeping an eye on him is the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, which sounds so nice and official, but really it's just some left-leaning group that's supposed to, I guess, ease their way into the country and keep one eye on them. And the person did accurately deduce that he was feeling suicidal, did not accurately deduce that he was feeling homicidal, and if they did nothing about it. So what's the point of the group? Not just that, but the guy drove cross-country to commit this murder. It was cold-blooded. And now I'm really kind of sick of the how sad he was stories, but they continue to pop up. He was sad, really sad. You know who else is sad? The family of Andrew Wolf and Sarah Beckstrom. That's who I have ink and patience for, not this guy's family. All right, I want to keep going now. Trump issued a tweet in response to all this, saying he's basically shutting down these asylum claims. He's going to try to denaturalize people who were naturalized citizens here under Joe Biden's auto pen. He's cutting off immigration from third world countries. And then you had Kristi Noem get on the air. Do we have that soundbite, you guys? She got on the air last night, was it? Was it last night or this morning? And she said, no, it was the New York Post reporting, said she wants a, quote, full travel ban on unnamed countries who are flooding the U.S. with dangerous migrants. She wrote on X, I am recommending a full travel ban on every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. This was after she, quote, just met with the president. So a DHS spokesperson told the Post a list of nations would be announced soon. So a full travel ban on like the loser countries. I don't know exactly.
It'll probably be the 19 countries they've already listed as countries of concern, countries that go to Charlie's point. If you don't have a functional country or a liable country government on the other end, you can't vet someone, and you're going to have huge visa overstay problems. So I think this kind of pause is appropriate, but of course it's going to be depicted as racist. Mark Kelly, our friend Mark Kelly, in that same Meet the Press interview that you played a clip from earlier, said that Trump wants to shut down third world immigration because he hates brown people, right? And this is an argument we're gonna hear, when actually you could stop all immigration from those 19 countries forevermore, and still the immigration flow into the United States would be overwhelmingly, to use his term, brown, because most people are coming from Latin America and from Asia, but they always play the race card.
Exactly right. And here, this aired actually. Is this SOT 5, the one from Sky News, guys? This is something different. Okay, but this is this is Veteran Action founder Mark Lucas, and he's talking about how Afghanis, for example, treat their children and their women. Just to give you one example of how different their culture is from ours. Take a listen here. SOT 5.
In Afghanistan, there was a saying that we as Americans have the watches, but the Afghans own the time. They're very patient. And over the weekend, I was sharing stories of what I witnessed as a platoon leader in Afghanistan in 2010. You know, the Afghan elders that I had to conduct key leader engagements with, they had small little boys that were called chai boys, maybe 8 or 9 years old, who were at every single one of our meetings giving us tea. And my Afghan interpreter told me that those young boys were sold into sexual slavery, and their parents were willing to sell their children in hopes that they would be able to be sent to Kabul to get a higher education from these elders. But my interpreter proudly told me that many of these young boys would grow up to become men, and they'd come back and they would kill those elders. But also the Afghans would beat their women. They have no respect for women. And I had 3 strong, brave women attached to my unit. They were members of my female engagement team, and they all just so happened to be blonde-haired. And we had to constantly protect them from our Afghan allies in the Afghan Border Patrol. But when we'd go out on a foot patrol, you'd have these sick Afghan men just hover around them. So I'm trying to warn people that these aren't folks that you want in your neighborhood.
I mean, Charlie, I think that's true. I don't think it's necessarily true of everyone in Afghanistan or these third world countries, but enough that why would we be wanting more immigrants from there?
Look, there are loser countries. There are loser countries, and we know that because we live in a non-loser country. This is one of the strangest things that I hear from people who...
We're hot now. Trump says we're hot.
Well,
we're a hot
but we are, and we are the greatest country in the world, and we're almost certainly the greatest country that there has ever been. And there are people here from all different places and all different races, and that's great. And I'm an advocate of this. But one of the things that I'm increasingly frustrated by from people who agree with me on this and who do think that immigration can be good and who do believe that America is a propositional nation that doesn't exclude anyone because of the country they were born in, is that if you believe that America is good, you also have to believe that other places aren't. Now, that doesn't mean you think everywhere is terrible and America is the only good country in the world. I'm not asking people to become, Sam the Eagle. But culture obviously matters. And it doesn't grow up from the soil. It's not the case that the moment you arrive in the United States, you're suddenly imbued with all of the presuppositions that make America what it is. You can't have one without the other. You can't believe America is good, uniquely good even, that it has this great creed, and that everywhere else is identical. So we need to be careful about where we bring people in from, and more to the point, we need to be careful about what we expect from them when we get here. Because if you suddenly replace the population of the United States with the population of other places, then the United States will become more like those other places unless you very assiduously demand, and that is the word, demand, that they conform to America. And the irony, of course, here is that the vast majority of people who live in those other places want to become Americans because of what America is. But that takes a bit of work, because it doesn't happen instantly you pass border control. And we seem unwilling now to do the work. So we say America's a great place, which it is. We say America's a creedal nation, which it is. And then we're not willing to do the work, whether that's at the educational level in schools and universities, whether that's at the immigration level. I mean, you mentioned this organization that went to visit this guy as being a left-wing NGO or what you will. There's far too many of those that don't actually like the United States. There was an example 3 or 4 years ago of Beto O'Rourke when he was running in Texas. I forget whether it was for Senate or governor. basically telling a bunch of immigrants as part of a campaign stop that America's history was terrible. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's how you prevent people from assimilating. So I think that we have to accept there are loser countries, there are bad places. And if you want to bring people in from them, which I'm not opposed to completely, although I think the numbers should be quite small, then you have to have enough social and national self-confidence to say, and if you're coming in, this is how we do it, and you have to get with the program because we're right and you're wrong. There's nothing wrong with that.
So
yeah, instead we've gotten lectured by the left on multiculturalism, Rich.
Yeah, in terms of culture and how enduring it was, I took a couple trips during the war to Afghanistan, Megyn. And I remember once they were showing us, I think it was at an air base, and the Afghans, when they were eating meat, would come and chop it up on the floor. And our guys, of course, thought that wasn't sanitary. So they built this beautiful facility with all these wonderful countertops. It looked like a kitchen in a cooking show you see on TV. And then so how do the Afghans use this? Oh, well, they put the meat on the floor and chop it up still, right? So that's just their culture, and it's very hard to change. Now, that doesn't mean that all Afghans are bad. And very likely Afghans will eventually assimilate to the United States in the second or third generation. But if it's our choice who comes here, why would we choose that if you can actually have people who can assimilate almost instantly, which make much more sense for our national interest? And just a final point on the one that Charlie made about numbers. Comic Dave Smith, I don't have much use for his foreign policy views, as you might have gathered by things I've written about him, but he was in a debate with libertarians about whether open borders make sense, and he was the anti-position. And he had this hypothetical that I think is really telling. What if there's a nuclear exchange, on the subcontinent, and we had open borders, and everyone in Bangladesh came to the United States just instantly? Would we still be the United States, or would we kind of be Bangladesh? And it's at least to some extent the latter. So that's not what you want in your immigration.
Yeah, exactly right. It's well said by Dave, and I totally agree with you. I've got to get to this just because it's too fun not to with you guys. President Trump had an MRI this week or last week, and on Monday the White House released information about it. They said he's fine. He's in, quote, excellent overall health. Presidential physician Dr. Sean Barbabella released a memo describing the October exam, okay, so it was a while ago, as standard, and its findings as perfectly normal. It was basically just a routine, comprehensive executive physical, and they took a hard look at him because he had some of those like circulatory issues causing his ankles to swell. In any event, he's fine, but not according to Megyn Hayes, who is the former special assistant to President Joe Biden and director of message planning, who on X Sunday posted the following. It is an undeniable fact. Donald Trump is aging rapidly. It should concern us all. Megyn Hayes, you don't know her maybe necessarily by name. I'm sure the audience doesn't. Maybe this will help as they see what Megyn Hayes is known for. Here's our first video, V1. There's Joe Biden working the rope line. Someone is in an Easter Bunny costume trying to distract him from talking to people, sending him on his merry way so that he will stop saying inane things. Let's play SOT 17 here. What's this? Easter Bunny scares Biden? Let's see. Oh, it's the SOT version. Okay, let's see. This is her interfering. He listens and moves right along. And this person, Charlie, Megyn Hayes, who's best known for that, would like to lecture us on presidential fitness for office.
Yeah, so I think it's worth saying at the outset that President Trump is old, and I personally would quite like it if we stopped electing people who are so old. But President Trump is showing no signs of being anything close to what Joe Biden had become, by the end of, maybe even the middle of, and some of the start of his only term in office. And what's happening here is this. The left got caught covering up Joe Biden's infirmity, and now has decided that it's their turn. And because Donald Trump is also quite old, they want people to say, yeah, Trump is exactly the same. They think they will get to play the same card. But that card was not dealt on the basis of the number of Joe Biden's birth certificate. that card was dealt because it was very obvious that Joe Biden was senile. If Joe Biden had been in the same sort of form that Donald Trump is in, and Donald Trump, it's worth saying, had two parents who lived a long time and did pretty well, then we would never have had that scandal in 2024. But I think what's happened is the Democratic Party and the left has just decided that because Biden had to go through that, then Trump does too. And so they're going to try and will it into existence when it's just not there.
And say that the right wing is ignoring it and therefore has dirty hands and can't call them out on their, it's so obvious and it's a failure. Guys, you were not a failure. You were a delight as always. Great to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Feel better.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. All right, when we come back, a first-time guest on this show who's been writing recently about what it means to be a good man. And let me just tell you, he would know.
Let's be honest. America can still be a dangerous place, and you cannot afford to wait for help. Sure, you could use a firearm, but in today's America, defending yourself with deadly force can have legal consequences. According to FBI data, 99.9% of all altercations do not require lethal force. And that's exactly why so many are turning to Byrna. Byrna is proudly American, hand-assembled in Fort Wayne, Indiana. These less lethal self-defense launchers are trusted by hundreds of government agencies, law enforcement departments, and private security companies as well. Over 600,000 Byrna pistols have been sold, most to private citizens who just refuse to be victims. Byrna launchers fire rock-hard kinetic rounds that will stop somebody in their tracks, and powerful tear gas and pepper projectiles that's more like, it's like a pepper spray on steroids that's capable of stopping a threat from up to 60 feet away. No background checks required, no waiting periods. And Byrna can ship straight to your door. You can get it in either orange or black. Take responsibility. Protect your future. Visit Byrna.com right now or your local Sportsman's Warehouse. That's BYRNA.com or your local Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit now and be prepared to defend.
My next guest is a former Marine who became well known for his books and essays about war, politics, and life after combat. Elliot Ackerman served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan during the War on Terror. He also took part in the CIA's Zero Unit, which was created to hunt senior members of al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The program's in the headlines this week because the Afghani national, accused of shooting 2 National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C., killing one of them, was also a member of Zero Unit. But more recently, Elliot has been writing some beautiful columns over at the Free Press about how to be a good man, something I can attest personally he is because he is a friend of mine. Elliot, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Megyn. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. So it's funny because even though we're friends and I adore you and your beautiful wife, Lee, I actually had never, I heard you on Doug's show, my husband, Doug Brunt, and his show Dedicated, but I had never read the actual commendation when you were awarded the Silver Star. And I'm so impressed by people who have been awarded like the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, all of that. It's like, it just really speaks to an extraordinary character. But you not only did 5 combat tours, 5 in Iraq and Afghanistan, but were awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart, the Silver Star being the 3rd highest military combat decoration. I'm going to read some of this, but let me just say, this is always kind of an interesting experiment. How do you describe the reason you were awarded the Silver Star?
Oh, I mean, one of the things that's sort of tricky about these awards is you get awarded for something that is probably, the worst day of your life. They don't hand out those medals when everything goes right on a mission. And oftentimes it is the leader of the unit who is awarded for what everyone else in the unit does. So, I was a platoon commander, a young platoon commander in Fallujah when the events occurred in my Silver Star citation. And a lot of it involved a moment when my platoon we were all surrounded in a house together and how we got out of that house. And then another moment included some wounded Marines who we got out of the line of fire. So those are the events mentioned in the citation. But, those awards are tricky. You read Medal of Honor citations, and, those are not happy days that you're reading about.
Well, you are, of course, as I knew you would be, too humble to actually talk about what you did, but I am going to tell the audience some of it. Excuse me. Quote, during a ferocious enemy counterattack in the insurgent stronghold of Fallujah, with complete disregard for his own safety, Second Lieutenant Ackerman twice exposed himself to vicious enemy fire as he pulled wounded Marines out of the open into shelter. When the amphibious tractors sent to evacuate his wounded men could not locate his position, he once again left the safety of his covered position and rushed through a gauntlet of deadly enemy fire to personally direct the amphibious tractors toward his wounded Marines. On 11 November, as the battle continued, Second Lieutenant Ackerman recognized the exposed position of his Marines on the rooftops and ordered them to seek cover in the buildings below. Shortly afterward, he personally assumed the uncovered rooftop position, prompting a hail of deadly fire from the enemy. With rounds impacting all around him, he coolly employed an M240G machine gun to mark targets for supporting tanks with devastating effects on the enemy. Throughout the battle, and despite his own painful shrapnel wounds, he simultaneously directed tank fires, coordinated 4 separate medical evacuations, and continually attacked with his platoon directly into the heart of the enemy with extreme tenacity. I love this. I love that I'm actually just first hearing this in-depth description of you after having known you for a couple of years. God bless you. Thank you right off the bat for your service. And then you went on to become a writer. So you've been writing books both about the military. So you did 5 combat tours. You were in Iraq. You were in Afghanistan. You were in the CIA. And yet somehow through all of this, you maintained a sense of fashion, which is a fun thing about you. Straight man, married to a gorgeous, brilliant writer who's also extremely talented, Lee Carpenter. But how does like a CIA, Marine, Fallujah, Silver Star earning guy like you, not to mention CIA, wind up so fashionable and straight?
Well, I don't really consider myself some grand fashionista, Megyn. I guess I do believe in, being intentional about everything that you do in life. And I actually think that's something that I learned in the Marines. Like, you wake up every day and you make decisions, right? You make decisions if you're going to like put on a pair of sweatpants, or maybe like, put on some khakis or some nice jeans or something to that effect. So I believe in living with intention. And I think if, you have intention that gives you a direction, it's how you achieve goals. So, I'm coming on your show, I could wear a t-shirt, or I could have wore my blazer. You know what I mean? Might as well wear my blazer.
Yeah.
So I don't consider myself a fashionista. I definitely consider myself someone who tries to pay attention to the small things and live life with intention.
And the follow-up is naturally, when are you taking Doug brunch shopping? When is that happening?
Anytime.
This needs to happen ASAP. Christmas is coming. I'm always very generous. I really, really would love Doug to get some Elliot Ackerman approved looks.
We can back channel for Doug.
Okay. So let me ask you about some of the stuff in the news, and then we'll talk about your columns, because I really love what you're doing at the Free Press. This guy who was part of this same force that you were part of, the Zero Unit, you didn't know him, but he was part of the same unit, who now shot these 2 National Guard members, killing one of them. Good news on the surviving National Guard member who we hear today has wiggled his toes and may have wiggled his hand or may have given a thumbs up. So that's encouraging. You wrote an interesting piece about this guy too, suggesting, look, this was not a good one. He was vetted, but we don't throw away all of the Afghani nationals we took after 2021 just because this guy was bad. And right now, I think most people are in the mindset of, yes, we do. Like, we're not taking any chances. They don't share our culture. One false start, they're all out of here. You make a compelling case that, not so fast. Explain.
Well, when I worked in the Zero units, our mission was, we went after very high level Taliban and Al Qaeda leadership. I mean, I remember the first day I showed up on the Zero unit, literally the first night working with that unit, I went after a top 10 Al Qaeda target, a very bad guy in the Korangal Valley. And standing next to me on that mission, it was basically, there were like 3 Americans and 250 Afghans. And we got that guy that night. And we worked, longtime members of SEAL Team 6, the U.S. Army Rangers. And what happened in D.C. is inexcusable, completely unacceptable. and I understand for most Americans, it's sort of an abstraction. They have no idea what the zero units are, and suddenly they're in the headlines, and that can be scary. So, but from someone who's spent time in those units, I'll tell you, my war buddies, many of them are Afghans, and we did everything that I did with the Marines you mentioned in that citation. I mean, we fought together, we bled beside one another, and many of those Afghans died, and they died not because they wanted to live in a backward-facing Afghanistan that included practices like bachabazi and the Chai Boys, which I listened to your previous segment. They wanted to live in an Afghanistan that's forward-looking and different, and that didn't work. So does that mean we should open the floodgates to every single person in Afghanistan who wants to come here? No, I wouldn't argue that. But I think when you look at a number of these members of the zero units, and some of whom are already U.S. citizens and in this country, contributing to this country, let's not make the mistake of being completely categorical in our thinking, because that's not what we've done historically as a nation. I mean, listen, my people came here more than 100 years ago from Ukraine, and we were basically shuttle Jews. And when we came off the boat, and I have the photos in my family, like, we did not look very American by 1900 standards. So I just think, there's a real conversation going on in this country about immigration. I think it's a worthy conversation. Administration is administration. It does not seem like this is an issue that we've gotten right. But I'll tell you right now, there are a bunch of Afghans who fought long and hard against our enemies that I know personally, who are afraid right now to be in America. And, I just think as a people, we are typically a generous and a welcoming people. We are also, a reasonable people. So I'm not making an argument for some categorical reception of everyone who wants to leave Afghanistan. For a lot of these people, folks who fought in the zero units, folks who fought in other units, who bled for American principles, I'd encourage all of us to just take a beat before we make big sweeping statements about entire groups.
Fair enough. It's good to get the other side, because when something like this happens, I think many of us feel like, just get them out. We got enough problems of our own. We don't have to inherit others. But you and other service members I know have pointed out, no, some of these guys actually really were critical to the fight and to saving American lives. And it's not that simple to just say, now get out. Like, we owe them more than that. And it's not all of them, but it's a fair amount of them. So we got to be careful. If we didn't do the screening on the way in, we definitely need to do the screening before we send them out.
Sure.
Okay. Now, you've been writing about how to be a man. And this is an important subject. You are a man. You have children who will be men. And you've been thinking about it, I'm sure, the same way we all been thinking about it, because we're having a crisis with young men in this country. The left calls it toxic masculinity. That's a lie. That's not what's happening here. What I see on the right is sort of a generation of lost boys who have been blamed for everything by the left. And that seeps into their K through 12 education. They hear similar when they go off to college. They don't get into the best colleges anymore because, especially if they're white, they're the last people that college administrators want to see on their campuses. They don't get the jobs that they used to, but they still have the same financial pressures as being head of household and so on. And this can all lead to a depressive cycle, not to mention the influence of the iPhone, gaming, social media, and all the rest of it. So why did you begin this series over at the Free Press?
Well, sorts of, I don't really consider myself, I'm not really a creature necessarily of the right or the left. I kind of roam around in my opinions, but I'm going to use some of the language that I consider is kind of the language of the left. And so much as the left for a long time has talked about, how marginalized groups, they need to be seen. They need representation. And I really believe that across categories. I think, like, children in particular, no matter who you are, like, you need to have an adult in your life who you can look at and say, I want to be like that person. Or you need teachers in your lives to speak with you with intention about your identity. I think that is all really important for young people. But guess what? That's also important for just sort of, straight young boys. Who maybe are pretty vanilla in their interests. Like, maybe they like just sports and, and action movies. And I think for a while, young people who've been just sort of more traditionally masculine, the only word that is attached to that word masculine is toxic. And we don't talk about all the great things that come with being masculine and how to be a good man. And oh, by the way, if you're a feminist, like there's nothing better for the feminist movement than creating good men. You don't want to inherit a bunch of lost boys who become lost men, because that's bad across categories, not just for those men. So I have an interest in this just as the father of three boys. Is that okay? How do I speak to my boys about the adults they're going to be, and the adults they're going to be men? And for me, it's this idea of just intention, and oftentimes just starting with the small things, like how do you tie a tie? How do you introduce yourself to someone? How do you ask me why do I dress nicely? It's that same thing. It's like making little decisions about how you're going to be in this world, and those little decisions are cumulative. But we haven't been having much of a deliberate conversation with that and speaking or seeing, to use that word, our young boys for a while. So I think the spirit of this is just to see those young men by offering them little bits of advice. And the series is titled, A Man Should Know, because in my life I had so many people teach me things, and at the end of giving me my lesson, they just like, a man should know how to do that. And that's all I'm saying is, hey, if you're a man, you should know how to do some of these things.
Yeah. Tell a story about your watch.
Oh, sure. So this is this watch of mine. I've had this watch for 20 years. I was on deployment in 2006 with the Marines, and we were in the Mediterranean Sea, and Israel had invaded Lebanon. And we were in charge of evacuating all of the American citizens out of Beirut. And that sounds a lot more exciting than it was. It basically meant we were just sitting on the ships doing circles for a couple of months. And one of my friends on that ship was a fighter pilot. And if you or any of your listeners have met fighter pilots, they're usually pretty reliably watch guys. And he kind of got me into watches and looking at watches. And I was making some money. I was a young single guy, and my pay was tax-free. And I had just come from Iraq, actually. And I started thinking, I really wish I'd had a better watch than something that I could kind of pass down and would be a little bit of an heirloom to my kids. So I took my pay from that deployment while we were at sea. And when we pulled into port, we pulled into Dubai. And I went to a mall, and I bought this watch. It's a nice watch. It's a Rolex Explorer 2. And I've worn this watch on my wrist every day for 20 years.
And what does it do for you?
To me, it's less about the watch. It's just about having something that you carry with you every day, and you imbue it with value, and it's something that can be passed down. So I wore this watch in Afghanistan. I work as a journalist. I've covered the wars in Syria and Ukraine. This watch was on my wrist then. It was on my wrist the day my children were born. It was on my wrist the day that I met my beautiful wife, Lee, and the day we got married. And, in the future, I'll probably, pass this watch down to my son. And then, buy myself another watch. But I think it's about creating meaning in some of the things that we have, and creating traditions. And that's something I think anyone should know how to do, but a man should know how to do, certainly.
Also, there was a piece about, I'm trying to remember whether it was the specific letter writing or thank you writing, one or both, or the combination.
I just wrote a piece last week. It was really about how to say thank you to someone, and sort of little gestures that we can engage in. So my wife and I had some friends over for dinner. This was a couple of years ago, and one of our guests just afterwards sent along a thank you note that he had printed out on a piece of stationery, just talking about the evening and how lovely it was. And I was sort of struck by, what a decent gesture that was. And so I started following that practice, and just, instead of sending someone a text after seeing them, or an email, and I'm just writing a follow-up thank you note. And I've just, really been impressed by how meaningful it is, and how meaningful it's been for me when I receive those notes, because there's something that you can hold on to. I save letters. So I think little gestures like that make quite the difference. I mean, and you know my wife, she's the queen of the thank you note / gift.
She's the queen of the thank you gift. That's why you're never coming over again, because Lee's gifts are so amazing that say thank you. I'm like, I can never live up to this. All I ever do is send a text. Yeah. She not only does she send you a gift, she sends it like a really clever gift that she put a lot of thought behind. I'm totally wowed by her.
Yeah. And she's good. And these lessons that I write about, I mean, the column is a man should know, but they're not things that are, just taught by men. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. And the piece on thank you notes is one I largely attribute to things my wife has taught me.
Mm-hmm. So what else should a man know? I mean, you have a challenge in today's day and age of imbuing the toughness of a Marine, but I don't want to say softness, but let's say tenderness of a man that a woman would want to be with, and who can navigate the tricky society that we're in 2020, nearly 2026 America. So, I mean, is that taught by example, or is that a lesson? Is that a chat at the dinner table, balancing those two poles of a man's personality?
Well, again, I think they're about intention and control. When I served in the Marines, my division commander in Iraq was, General Mad Dog Mattis. And, he famously told the 1st Marine Division that our motto was, no better friend, no worse enemy. And I think, a man should understand how to be gentle, how to be kind, how to be open-minded, but should also know, how to be strong and how to be tough and single-minded when the moment calls for it, and be able to toggle between those two with utter control. So, this series doesn't necessarily go into the deeper philosophy, but it really kind of focuses on just sort of specifics, little ways to be intentional as a man with how you exist in the world and present yourself in the world. So some of the columns we have coming up are, just frankly, how to wear a tuxedo. Who's going to teach you? A lot of people just don't know how to do that. And if the first time you get invited to a black tie event, it's the first time you have to figure out how to put on a tuxedo, maybe that's going to be a little bit awkward for you. So these are just little things, stuff that people taught me that I hope to pass on, not only to my sons, but to just pass on in general to anyone who wants this knowledge, because I think it's worth holding on.
And there's a great one in there on how to be a friend, especially as a guy, and how to make it easier to have meaningful conversations with your friends. I'm sure you're going to be having one of those this week with Doug Brunt, and I'll be with your lovely wife. Thank you so much, Elliot. It's great to see you.
Great to be on. Thanks, Megyn.
Check out the series, you guys. It's A Gentleman Should Know, and it's A Man Should Know, and it's over at the Free Press. And Elliot, as you can see, knows of what he speaks. He's a very smart writer. His books have been bestsellers. He's got a very impressive history, and he's just genuinely a good person. So I think you will enjoy it, and I thought you'd enjoy him. We are back tomorrow with Chamath of the All In podcast and more. We got a couple surprises in tomorrow's show for you. Tune in then and see them. And while I have you, is it shopmegankelly.com? You can go to shopmegankelly.com. You can get holiday merch with the MK Show logos on it. That could be fun for the man or woman in your life. Check it out, and we'll see you all tomorrow.